Wait, go.
Welcome, everyone. I am off of my timing. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome. Brian is here tonight. Thank you for coming, Brian.
Welcome.
Man, this is going to be a great evening. Brian tonight is joining us. We're teaching a class on something. Ask me anything, something.
No.
CapEx. Okay.
Silent killer.
It is silent. The killer is silent.
Yes.
All right. Welcome, Brian. I'm James Orr. Take it away.
Excellent. Sounds good. Let's get going. Welcome to N. Craig. Tonight, you get to introduce yourself. James can put, I went to McDonald's for dinner. Everyone else needs to change your chat to all panelists and attendees. James's pro tip. And the question of the night is, what is one thing that you take into account when budgeting for CapEx for a rental property?
Oh.
Because that's what we're going to talk about is CapEx, the silent killer. I don't even know why you called it that. But anyway, next week is James' most infamous class that he hasn't taught yet. He's going to teach us why all of the stuff that we've ever done ever in our lives is actually wrong, and his way is right, and it's trademarked, so it has to be true. He's basically going to teach us about ROIQ plus R. James, what the heck?
Yeah, it is going to be awesome. Like, that class is the class you've been waiting for your entire life. You just didn't know it. So everything you've learned about deal analysis, forget it, because it is completely wrong. And I will prove it to you with math next week on October 7th via webinar. And Brian and I have been saving multiple conversations about this very topic for this class so that we can have them live in front of you and we can have a lively debate discussing some of this stuff. So I plan on putting together a new slide deck sometime between now and then with a whole bunch of this stuff in it, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So don't miss that.
Don't miss it.
It will be amazing.
It will be amazing.
And the next week will be even more amazing because it's going to be Ask Me Absolutely Anything, focused only on James about real estate investing. I think he means the A to be almost, but I am going to make it absolutely anything.
You're backing yourself into a corner. Someone's going to come in and ask you something very, very personal and private, and you're going to be like, it is absolutely anything, and then you're going to be in trouble.
Only if you go first.
Well, you know me. I'm not embarrassed about most things. There are a couple things I'm a little bit embarrassed about, but I have a much wider range of things that I'm not embarrassed about than you are, I think.
I don't think that's true. I'm not
Really?
embarrassed about much.
Okay.
Anyway, that is the real estate investing. Come ask your questions. James and I got an email earlier today that's like 9 pages long. And I was like, well, hard. I guess we just filled up the class with questions on that stuff.
There are hard questions in there too. Some of them are pretty dense.
Yeah. No doubt. I stopped reading after the first 2 paragraphs. I was like, I will just save this for class.
Yeah, I had the same thing. I'm like, okay, there's some good stuff in here, but I needed some time to process this.
Yeah. And then the following week, and then the week after that, well, I am not teaching the cash flow power meter. So that is not correct.
That would be pretty fun to actually see you teach that class.
Sure. I understand it, but yeah. So James is going to teach us the ultimate guide to earnest money, which is a mini class. What's a mini class? James?
It's I'm too lazy to prepare 2 hours worth of content, so
it'll be 2 hours anyway.
It might be 2 hours anyway, but the intention is to dive really deep into a really small piece, because one of the complaints I actually get, and this is legit, I'm not joking right now, one of the actual complaints we get about stuff is people say to me, James, I want information on this thing, and I don't want to have to go through 2 hours of one of your amazing classes and try to find where you talked about this for 5 minutes. And so what we really need to do is break out small chunks so that we gather all the different times we've ever talked about earnest money or these other mini topics I'm putting together and focus them all in on one spot. So if somebody has a question about earnest money or seller concessions or, determining fair market rents or whatever it is, that is that little mini topic, that we have a separate class that people can come and watch and get everything in whatever it is, 15, 20, 30, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it takes to do.
Hey, James, I don't want to sort through your 2 hour class, but can I sort through the hour 45-minute class instead? Pointless. Yeah. And
That's
then
true.
The next week, After that, you're going to teach the cash flow power meter. What is that about?
That's also trademarked. It is pretty amazing. It is a new thinking tool about cash flow. Yeah, very good. Edit it real time. Yeah, it's going to go over a brand new tool that I created. I don't know. This is probably like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, or something like that. I was driving around, I was thinking about some stuff, and I came up with this like visual model of stuff. And I called you on the phone and I talked to you about it. And you like +1 me and added a couple little extra tweaks to it, which made it even better. And so thank you for doing that. I'll talk about it when we do the class. But it is this really cool new thinking tool about cash flow and measuring cash flow and how to determine that. Yeah, +1 from Brian. That's true. It's absolutely true. I mean, I usually give you credit when you do stuff.
I know. I'm just messing around. Okay. All right. And if you want to go and you don't like the stuff we're teaching, stop listening. But seriously, I mean,
what are you doing on the call? Oh my gosh.
I mean, if you don't like what we're teaching, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah,
but if you don't really like what we're teaching, you can go to realestatefinancialplanner.com/suggest and actually tell us what to teach, and we'll teach it. Assuming more than one person wants to hear it.
And assuming I feel qualified to teach it. Some people are like, I want you to teach, I don't know, syndicating industrial building sales. Like, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. So this slide tells you exactly where to get to the podcast. So if you don't want to listen, this is where you can go, and then you'll know you need to listen, and everything will be all perfectly fine after that.
True.
COVID-19 update.
Wow.
I know. We're just
I have like no responsibilities here tonight at all.
I know.
It's awesome.
It's a good thing you have your soda.
I need to get a refill, actually. I drank the whole thing.
Your mom is going to be unpleased.
That is actually true.
Is she on the web? I'm going to invite her to the webinar.
I saw her over the weekend and she did make some comments.
Yeah. So this is where we're at. If you remember, so the nice thing about this is that all of my predictions are literally like documented. So you can literally go back week to week to week to week. And I will say, I'm going to wait till next week to more confirm it, or 2 weeks out. But last week I was like, yep, September 13th, bunch of people in the US going back to school. Labor Day happened. Give it about 2 weeks, 3 weeks time for the virus to kind of take hold and get counted. And we definitely see this uptick. I expect this uptick to continue to go up. Right now, you can see right here at the end, it's going down just a little, but I am not yet trusting that. And I've seen other reports that this is going to go back up, and hopefully we don't get back up here, but please stay safe, wear a mask, be a good human being. Those are my
All right, so hold on a second. So what I just heard you say is that all of your predictions have been documented and that you predicted that we were going to see an uptick in cases. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But the chart is showing that the cases are down. So how is it that you've accurately predicted stuff?
I said this is the first week that I think I'm not on.
Oh, okay. I take that back then. Okay.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago I said cases were going up. So September 13th, I said cases were going up. Did they go up?
Yes, I totally. I admit you're victorious in this little debate here. I didn't hear that you were wrong.
Debate over.
Brian, I wasn't trying to rub it in. That was not the intent.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, I hope it goes back down. I really do.
Yeah, we all do.
All of the things, all of the indicators that I see and all the stuff that's going on, I don't think this little dip. And you'll also notice that we have spikes on certain days of the weeks. And so I don't know if we just fell on the wrong day and there's a huge spike on the next day. So it could just be that, because this is a trailing, I think it's a trailing 7-day average on the line.
Could be Mondays when people have to go back to work. They suddenly come down.
Yeah, I think it's actually like Tuesday or Wednesday is when the big spike is, but I'm not sure. So anyway, delinquency update in dollars is from the property manager. So we are not down very much more. If you didn't pay your dollars that you owed by the 23rd, apparently you're not paying them by the 29th either. So that is, 3.44%. It's not great, but it's not 10%. So it's not terrible. Delinquency update in number of units that have not paid. We did see a little bit of a drop here from 6.3% to 5.75%, which I think is good. We didn't quite get back to where we were in August, and this is my fear, right? And this is why your next week's class, the ROIQ plus R, why that R is going to be very important in having those reserves, because this, if we start seeing 6% of units not pay rent each month or some portion of rent for the next 4 months and you can't evict, that's going to eat into your reserves. And if you don't have any reserves, it's going to eat into your personal savings. And if you don't have any personal savings, you're in trouble. So that's what I think.
Yeah.
Vacancy rate, September 29th. We did get the property manager, I should say, did get from 4.42% down to 3.6%. So that was a good week, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Any questions on that?
I don't have any questions. I almost wish there was a chart of this so I could just visually see where we are compared to other months.
I know somebody who knows how to make charts. I can call him later.
I know somebody who already made a chart of this.
Yeah, I know. All right. So this class is really about capital expenses, capital expenditures, CapEx, whatever you want to call it. We call it the silent killer. I don't know why I keep doing that. It's just funny to me.
That's new. I don't think that was until this particular round of doing this class.
It happened because of the title that you put in there one day, and I was like, oh no, you can't put that in there. And I was like, well, we're gonna distract from that and do for the silent killer.
Okay.
Or maybe this class should be called. Oh man, I didn't take the transitions out. It's gonna be a long night.
It's not gonna add that much to have the transitions. We waste more time going off topic than we do with the transitions.
True. Next time we go off topics, I'm removing them real time.
Well, you could go pause it, hit remove, control all, do the thing. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I know. Or maybe it should be called low price rentals. Some things to consider. Or maybe it should be called stop asking me if you should buy this amazing $30,000 property in insert whatever city here. So let's just get to it. Let's call a pig a pig. We are talking about long-term buy and hold. We're not talking about short-term. We're not talking about flip. We're not talking about trying to time the market. We're not talking about any of that crap. We are talking about lower end purchase prices, probably $30,000 to $100,000 with rents less than $900 a month. You have to take that off, dude.
Only for this slide. I'm going to leave it on.
Oh my God. For apartments, this is probably rent of less than $625 a month. This is typically a C-class property. What we are not talking about, so you can take it off now.
Okay.
Buying a distressed property for $30, $40, $50, $60, even $100,000 that's really worth a lot more when you fix it up and sell it. That's not what we're talking about tonight. So if you ask a question and you're like, but I could buy this property for $60,000 and it's worth $120,000, that's not our discussion tonight. So please don't get those two things mixed up because it's a very distinct discussion. We're also not talking about trying to time the market for a short-term flip. Hey, I saw this house. I think it's in a neighborhood that's going to be regentrified in 3 years. And I think the value of this home is going to go from $40,000 to $100,000. So I am going to actually just buy this and sit on it for 5 years, not make any money, and then sell it for a profit. That is not what we're talking about. Lastly, we are not, although we do have one slide on this, we are not talking about you being a turnkey rental provider to other people, and we will discuss what turnkey means later in the presentation. But basically, it's doing the flips yourself and then selling those off. All the people are always in the mood for bacon, apparently, James. So you might want to lock your doors. It's in the chat.
Oh, man.
So I didn't really change this presentation literally much at all because there's just not much I can add to it that really does it any justice. And it's already good and it's already got some humor in it. So I just had to leave it here. So when I first did my search, I think I first taught this class in 2015, which is like so long ago now.
It is.
Like remember when we used to go out to restaurants?
like after we had class, like that's
like I don't know. Maybe you should come over tonight and sit on my front porch, or I'll come sit on your deck.
Remember when we used to hug people that came to Craig?
Yeah, no doubt.
That was crazy.
Remember when you used to hug your best friend?
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Remember when I used to hug my wife?
Right. Well, that's weird. Sorry, champion.
Oh, man.
So this is literally the first property I found in my search. So I went out and I was like, hey, I'm going to search on some properties to try and find some lower price rentals that I could buy that are maybe out of state. I'm in Colorado. If you're in the state that I'm about to mention, it's not a hit on that. It's just a discussion. So this is the house that I found. And normally in the classroom, this would be really interactive. It'd be like, hey, does that look like a decent house? honestly, it looks like a hailstorm just like smashed into the front side of it if you look really closely. Like,
Stop.
are there actually holes in the siding, or is that just missing paint? I'm not sure. So definitely old 3-tab roof is what it looks like on the top, but then down here it looks like it might be dimensional. So who knows? This is the picture. This is what the description said of this property. This 3 beds, 1 bath, which not exactly perfect grammar, property has a $750 monthly rent, which makes it a typical bread and butter investment opportunity. It's an opportunity. These are exactly the types of properties that everyone at Ohio Cash Flow has been buying for their own portfolio, and we encourage all of you to do the same. Straight from the web. So, purchase price, almost $60K. I decided, hey, we're going to buy it. Let's roll in our closing costs. No need to come out of pocket an extra $3K for this deal. Let's just roll them in. So $62,900 is our actual cost. Rent, $750 a month. Vacancy, 3%. So here's our rent. If you've never seen this portion of the spreadsheet, you can download the spreadsheet from, I believe it's realestatefinancialplanner.com/spreadsheet. Is that right, James?
Yes, that's correct.
So this is that spreadsheet. Rent $750, you plug it in here. Vacancy 3%, taxes $600, insurance $600, maintenance 10%, management 10%, cash on cash a whopping $227 a month, or almost 22%. James, does that sound exciting? If I came to you and I said, hey, I ran the numbers on a property and it's got 22% cash flow, what do you think?
Yeah, seems amazing. I mean, any type of property that cash flows 20% is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, this could be 8%, right? And you'd still be amazed.
Yeah, especially around here.
Right, in Northern Colorado.
Sure.
So, and with all of this taken into account. So here's what that looks like, right? Net operating income of $5,784 brings us right down to our monthly cash flow of $227, 21.66%. So right now, hopefully a lot of you are like, man, I would totally buy that deal, right? Except for the fact that you know what the name of the class is, which the last time I taught this class, I almost changed the name of the class tonight to like, why you should buy $30,000 properties in insert state here, just to mess with people, but I didn't. So I'm sure most of you are like, well, I would like to buy a property that cash flows 20%. And at the same time, you're like, but Brian's about to tell us maybe this isn't such a great idea. So
it's a trap.
It's a trap. What was that thing you used to do? It's a bear trap?
The bear trap in poker.
You did this thing,
I did this.
You were like, it's a bear trap.
I was setting the bear trap for you.
Yeah, I don't know that you know how to set a bear trap. Setting a bear trap does like this.
This is the shorthand version of that. It's like when it's already done and it's down. Now it's like closing on you. Yeah.
So would you buy this, James? Assuming the condition is good, it had a recent remodel, look good inside. Would you buy this property?
I don't, not me personally. I don't think I would. I'd be tempted by the cash on cash, but it's not my investing strategy to buy these types of properties.
All right. So if you're out there, yeah, Jason says he'll take 4. So if you're out there and you're by your chat and you're like, hey, I would buy that property, type that in the window.
Or raise your hand.
Or raise your hand.
Either one.
So let's actually dig in and analyze what's going on here. So we got some people buying this property, at least 3. Yeah, further information required. No further information is required. I told you had a recent remodel inside and it's 21.66% cash on cash. That should be enough information.
We showed you the spreadsheet.
That's right.
And the picture.
Yeah, and James said he wouldn't buy it. There's enough information right there. So if we dig in, is 3% vacancy reasonable, James?
I think it is if you're doing property management correctly and starting at least 60 days ahead of the property going vacant and lowering your rent if you need to. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, James is wrong. So these are not bad neighborhoods where you're like carrying a shotgun to collect your rent and hoping you don't get shot, which has happened. We've talked about that story. It's insane. But they're not the best neighborhoods, right? You should probably expect more turnover. So it's not just going to be, hey, my lease is up, I'm turning over. It's probably going to be, hey, I just abandoned the property because I couldn't pay rent or I had to move. So in this case, vacancy probably ends up being much higher. And the other thing that leads to that is what we typically teach for rent increases is, hey, every year Your rent's $1,900. Okay, well, if market rent's $2,000, at least make your rent $1,925, if not $1,950. Like, do a small rent increase constantly so that you kind of keep up with where market rent is.
To the same tenant. If it's a brand new tenant, we're raising it to market rent. Yeah.
Yes. But in this case, if you had a place that's running for $600 and you try and increase it to $650, that literally may be too much. And they'd be like, I can't pay and I'm going to move. Right. Even though you're like, well, moving is going to cost you way more than the $50 times 12 months for this year. So that doesn't make any sense. But that's not how that logic works for tenants. So this actually prevents you from creating more value, both from cash flow and from kind of what the property is worth, because you can't raise those rents. So what do you actually think is the right vacancy? So if somebody says, hey, I target 5 to 10% vacancy, and Robert, I don't know where you are, if you're actually in Ohio or if you're somewhere else. Here in Fort Collins, we definitely target a much lower vacancy because it's actually real. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But if any of you guys that are listening, hey, what do you think the right vacancy is for this? It's in Toledo, Ohio. Is it 3%, 5%, 10%, 20%? Anybody have any guesses? I've got 5% in Pueblo. And Robert, I'm actually unclear if that's like Louisville, Colorado, or like Louisville, like
Kentucky, or I think there's a couple Louisvilles.
Yeah. So I've got 6%, 7%, 8%, literally 3 different people in a row. That's pretty impressive.
That is well impressive. Michael, you dropped the ball. It should have been 9% for you.
Yes, I know. So we got 6, 7, and 8. I think actually a reasonable assumption based on my knowledge is 10%. And that's what I'm going to go with for this analysis. And that assumption is based on reading all sorts of stuff that shows that in some of these cases, 10% actually might be low. So I'm kind of being a little conservative and a little aggressive, kind of right in the middle. So there is where our vacancy is going to be, 10%. So how about maintenance? What do we typically include, James? You're going to have to play the role of audience, James. So I don't want you to play the role of you. I want you to play the role of a typical Craig audience and give those answers.
Okay. Should I use an accent to differentiate between me and the audience?
If you feel like, no, probably you will get in trouble. Yes. Because I'm not sure what accent you're going to use, but if you do your Tammy voice, that might be okay.
Okay. I'll try to keep a straight face. Okay.
So what do you think is included in $873 a year of maintenance? Because that's really what we have. It's 10% on the rent we're getting. So what are we going to spend that
on? That's probably, maybe a plumbing call, maybe a kind of like carpet every 12 years. Probably some, appliance repair occasionally. Maybe
pest
a little
control?
Bit of pest. Well, probably not pest control. We're probably skipping that at that price point. Maybe a new roof every once in a while. I mean, that's sort of not much in terms of how far $873 would go.
Yeah. So, I mean, turnover items, right? When you turn a place over, you got to go in and hopefully some of this is picked up by their damage deposit, but some of it's normal wear and tear, right? Like you're going to have to fix a faucet. You're going to have to clean the furnace. You're going to have to clean the air conditioner if it has one, right? And then all those little things that break. Hey, something, I actually had it got charged back to the resident, but I actually had a call for a plugged toilet. They had to go take the toilet off the floor to get, you won't believe this, out of the toilet, a cell phone battery.
What? Like a kid did that, or like an adult trying to flush it?
I have no idea. So, somebody throws a G.I. Joe down a toilet and, you have to go out and you have to pull it out. Hopefully you can charge it back to the resident, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
So when those things break, that's what's coming out of your maintenance budget, right? Plumbing, heating, electrical service, other maintenance calls. You send a plumber out, because I guarantee your plumbing problem will happen Saturday afternoon. It won't happen during the week when you can call somebody that's not an overtime call. It will happen Saturday or Sunday or on holiday.
Yeah.
That's the only time things leak. I don't know if you're aware of that.
When they have Christmas, 12 people over.
Yeah. It's so bad. So, you have a plumber go out for a charge on a weekend, you're at least at $300, at least in Colorado. I mean, there's just no way around it. So, $125 for a handyman to come in and do some work and some supplies, $75 to service your furnace or furnish your service, whatever you want. $100 for a plumbing call. This stuff adds up. It adds up really fast. So as an example, in Loveland, I bought a house. This is a while ago even, right? The house is in great condition. I sent the inspector through. I went through and I was like, hey, I got to go do a couple things, right? Home Depot, handyman, broken garage remotes, a furnace service, and some vacant utilities, and I'm out $770. That's like our full year of maintenance on this property. But the problem is that garage remotes don't care how big your property is or what your rent is. They're at the same price. Like if you have a garage door, it doesn't cost less because your house is smaller. And that's one of the problem.
That's one of the big things I take away from this class when you teach it, is that there are certain things that they're fixed costs, regardless of whether it's a $30,000 house or it's a $300,000 house.
Right. Or $1 million house, right? Correct. Or a $5 million. I mean, it's just silly. So you can see very quickly, this stuff adds up. So I'm going to say, hey, what do you think is a good number for the kind of ordinary stuff that happens per year? And I'm going to be super aggressive, $400, right?
And by aggressive, you mean you're going to come in really low. You think that this is a really low number.
Yes. Conservative would be like, hey, I'm going to put $2,000 here and we'll call it a day, right? I'll have plenty of money in reserves, but $400, this is, I'm going to, I just had my furnaces serviced in my house and it was like $139, right? And I'm sure you can get that a little cheaper, like $99, but even at $99, you do that for a furnace a year, there's $100 of your $400 right there. So
can I play devil's advocate since I'm playing part of the audience?
Yeah, and you got to talk in your Tammy voice though.
And if you're have a 2 hour and 20-minute presentation, definitely let me know. Because what I'm thinking here though is, on a $30,000 property, are we sending a furnace guy out to check the furnace every year, every other year that we might do on a $300,000 property?
At least every other year, because if your furnace goes, you have a much larger expense.
Okay.
And that's the problem, right? You can't not service your furnace for 5 years and then expect it to last very long, right? And we know that most tenants aren't changing the filter. Do you think the tenant in this house is changing the filter any more than a tenant in a $300,000 house? Because no one changes filters. I don't know why, but they just don't.
And even on a percentage of rent basis, a tenant in a $600 a month type of property that's a larger percentage for them to pay for the filters than it is for someone who's paying $2,000 and that's to just pick it up when they're at the hardware store anyway.
Right. And I would be more than happy to pay for the filter and leave it in the house so that the tenant can just swap it out. And I know it's at least getting changed, but that's still a cost that I'm going to incur. So $400 a year. Carpet and interior paint. So I typically include this in maintenance. If you were in the class where I showed kind of all of my maintenance and management numbers from the past, whatever it is, 8-9 years, and I did a whole really long spreadsheet, and then I kind of just gave you conclusions on that, I include a lot of things just in my maintenance number versus my CapEx number. But for me, I definitely include carpet and interior paint in this because it happens a lot, right? It's not a roof where, hey, every 30 years or 20 years or every hailstorm or whatever, right? This is, if the flooring doesn't look good, I'm going to need to replace it. If the paint is bad, I need to have it painted. So I'm going to just throw out, hey, let's assume turnover every 2.5 years. New carpet and paint every 5 years. James, have you ever had to replace carpet sooner than 5 years?
Yes.
What's the shortest carpet life you've ever had?
I think I had a tenant go in and 6 months later moved out and they destroyed the place.
Yeah. So I've literally had a under 30-day carpet failure. I recarpeted the place. Somebody moved in, trashed it, dog crap everywhere. 30 days later, I had to replace it.
Yeah. Mine was, I think, 6 months.
Yeah. So, that's going to happen, but I'm just going to assume turnovers every 2.5 years, new carpet and paints every 5 years. It might well be 7 years, but it also might be every single turnover. And it might be sooner than that. It might be somebody moves in 6 months, they trash it, they move out, you put someone new in there, and then 2 years later, you have to replace it again. So I'm being, again, aggressive in the fact that I'm choosing a longer period of time than is likely.
Anti-conservative is what I think you're saying by aggressive.
Sure.
Yeah. So you made a comment before about you did a whole hour like segment on maintenance and how your exact numbers are for your portfolio properties and all that stuff. And for those that didn't know what it was, it's arguably the best class of the year, part 5. And it is available on both the podcast and the website for those that missed it. I'll send a link in the chat window here too.
Cool. And so I'm reading some of the comments, right? If it's a cheaper house, I use a more conservative number than, 100K plus property. I use 10% for maintenance. This is 10%. I mean, that's what's crazy is 10% of, $700 a month is just not a lot of money. And that's the problem is that 10% sounds reasonable on the surface, but when you look at the actual sheer dollars that you're getting, it's not enough. And I think that's what we're going to see. So carpet, this is low. I guarantee this is low. Like this is not what I pay for carpet and paint installed, right? But $2.50 a square foot and $1.50 a square foot for paint. That's not $1.50 per every square foot on the wall. They have a formula they use. So roughly in this particular house, based on the square footage of the house, it's $5,228 every 5 years. And that's out of our budget of $4,365. This is like spending more than you make. You're not going to do well. You like that?
3 out of 2 people don't understand fractions. That's
yes.
this.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So I think this is really, you look at this and you go, okay, well, we need to have a higher number. So quick recap, we decided $400 a year for regular maintenance, which we think is low. And then we're going to add $1,045 a year per the above for carpet and paint so that we have enough to replace it after 5 years. So what do we get? This bumps us to 17.7% in maintenance. I want you to think about this for a second. We went from 10, which for a single family home probably seems pretty reasonable, like in Northern Colorado for a $300,000 house or a $400,000 house or even a $200,000 house. We went from 10 to almost 18% just to cover carpet and paint and just to cover a really small portion of kind of normal maintenance stuff. Probably not enough. James, are you taking care of all these comments? Because I am not going to be able to keep up on them. So if there's anything you want to add, just throw it in there.
Will do.
And I just want to point out, don't forget to calculate your maintenance as a percent of gross operating income, which is basically gross potential income minus vacancy, because you're not going to get 12 months of what you think you're getting for rent, right? Our vacancy is 10% here. So you've almost lost 1 month of rent. So you're not going to have as much money for maintenance. All right, let's analyze the analysis. Management. How much does management cost? It's planned at 10%. Most property managers have a minimum. It's sometimes around $75 a month. In this case, we're very close, so we don't really need to adjust for the property. But don't forget, when the property is vacant, the property manager still gets paid. So during that 10% of vacancy or almost a month, they're still getting their $75 a month, and you still have to pay for that. So where's that coming from?
So 2 things. Number one is that is not always the case. In some markets, a property manager may decide to forego that. The second thing is to go back through an older comment. Somebody said, hey, so some of these things are CapEx and not maintenance when we were talking about the maintenance numbers. Are you going to go over a slide of that later? Or do you want to handle that now?
Yeah, I can talk about it now. So This was also in my presentation, arguably the greatest, whatever the name of the class is that you just posted, arguably the best class of the year, part 5. Mm-hmm. And really what I talk about is when it comes down to it, when you go to your CPA, at least when I go to my CPA, who's amazing, by the way, he is only going to say, hey, anything below $2,500 in a single expense, we're just going to expense that. We're actually not going to show that as a depreciated capital expenditure on the property. And for most property owners, I think either $1,000 or $2,500 is probably the right range. There's a whole host of different CPAs that will say different things, but it basically comes back to the Safe Harbor Act, yada, yada, yada. I'm sure Jason is typing a comment as I say this in order to tell me why I'm wrong or why I'm right. But usually you are not going to, you're not going to capital expenditurize something like a water heater for $1,100. You're going to just treat that as an expense and have it be a write-off in that single year. Some people are doing not that, and that's okay. Talk to your CPA. I'm not one. I'm not giving CPA advice. But that is really kind of where I stand is, when you start looking at the things that we put on the CapEx list, a lot of them end up falling into the maintenance category. And so you might be saying, well, paint, that's a, capital expenditure. Well, in this particular case, I forget how many square feet this house is, but it's something like, I don't know, 1,100, right? The cost for this paint job is going to be probably $1,000 to, $1,500. And so are you really treating that as a capital expense? Most CPAs are going to say, no, it's interior paint. Probably not. And so I'm only using this as carpet and paint because those are normal turnover things, right? A water heater, a roof, kitchen remodel, bathroom remodel. Those are not normal turnover things unless you have really bad tenants all the time. So hopefully that actually helps.
Okay. And then here's another question. For these properties, would it be worth buying a home warranty and pay the service call fee when something needs to get repaired?
Depends on what the home warranty covers and how much they're going to pay out and how long it lasts. I mean, yes and no, right? In some cases, it's totally worth it. If you buy a home warranty and it's $80 and it turns out your furnace has gone out and they replace the furnace, then yes, it was worth it. But if you paid $500 for the home warranty and you never, ever have a claim, then no, because I don't think tenant damage is going to fall under home warranty claims. It's going to be failure of the actual thing that is supposed to be warranted.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of stuff on home warranties. I should probably do a whole class on the math behind buying home warranties and how that would all work out. So I probably would do a separate class on that.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I probably need to have another moment to go read some more.
All right,
yes,
I'll keep going.
Thanks.
So let's update our analysis with all the things we just discussed. 10% vacancy, 17.7% maintenance, 10% management. This includes when it's vacant and it matches the seller suggestion. So here is our new analysis. Cash on cash return, $133 a month, 12.7% cash on cash. James, this is a deal.
Maybe.
James is skeptical.
Well,
he doesn't like half the stuff I buy.
It's like there's been traps set up before. Like you told me it was 22% like 5 minutes ago. So I'm highly suspicious of what's going on.
Skeptical. Good to be skeptical. So I think the question is, I mean, this is still 12% cash on cash. That's pretty amazing. You have to admit. If that's real, you have to admit that's awesome. Fully managed. So why are we investing, James, in Northern Colorado instead of Toledo?
Obviously not for cash flow. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Remember, we started at whatever it was, 22.6. We're down to 12.7. So let's see what else actually needs to happen. So let's take a look at CapEx. What are capital expenses? So these are typically the larger items that you're going to have. And typically you allow your CPA, or the tax code allows your CPA to depreciate these across the life of the item. Sometimes that life will be 5 years. Sometimes it's 7 years. Sometimes it's longer, right? Let your CPA figure that out for you. Roof and gutters, usually a very big one. Most common one we probably talk about with CapEx. HVAC, right? Your furnace, your AC, your boiler. Boilers are expensive. If you've ever replaced a boiler and you've done it for less than like 8, 9, 10K, either your boiler is really small or you got a really good deal. But those are huge expenses. And it's not like I can buy, a third of a boiler and then buy a third of a boiler next year and expense it. I have to buy the whole boiler or my units don't have heat. Windows. So here's an example of one where you might say, oh, well, that's a capital expense, Brian. And I might say, well, is it? Because if you go in and you replace 3 windows in a property and it costs you $900, is that really a capital expense or is it just maintenance? To me, that's maintenance, because when you go to do your taxes, that's going to just be an expense. If you go in and you replace 20 windows in a building, then yes, absolutely, you're probably going to actually capitalize those and depreciate them over time.
Hey, pause for a second. Hey, Jerry, sure. I'm going to ban you from the call. Actually, Brian is, because you're not allowed to solicit during a live class. So, Brian, would you please ban Jerry R? You can kind of see it there. Thank you.
Cool.
And by the way, now that Jerry is banned, do not use him. I would not trust somebody who does that type of solicitation in the middle of a meeting like this.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Awesome. That's number 2. Maybe we should just state that at the beginning of class.
We probably should. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't be a jerk. So appliances. Here's another great example. If you went and actually redid all your appliances, stainless steel appliances, and you got a package and it was like $3 or $4 grand, maybe you're depreciating that. If you had to replace an oven for $500, it's an expense. So it's really not CapEx. So this is the, is it a CapEx? Is it an expense? And Jason posted something that I don't even have time to read right now because I'm teaching the class, but I'm sure it basically says what I'm saying is right. Hopefully he will say, yes, agreed. Water heater. How much does it cost to have a water heater, right? Is it $800, $1,000? You're probably expensing this, right? And honestly, if it's me, I want to expense it unless I'm really trying to like move my taxes in a certain direction where I'm like, I need to have as much profit this year as possible for some reason because I'm trying to apply for loans, right? But I tend not to do that with my taxes anyway. I tend to just be like, hey, that was an expense it, right? And I'm done. So exterior paint, doors, cabinets, countertops, other major components like electrical and plumbing. You got to go pull knob and tube wiring or some other rewire of your whole house or part of the house. That's expensive, right?
Jason says you are correct, by the way.
Yes. Brian is right. That felt weird to type. That's awesome, man. I love it. Interior paint and flooring count too, but we've already accounted for those. So that's like totally redundant. We've already accounted for those already. I guess it's just how I said it. It's not how it's written.
Okay.
So how much and how often? James, how often do you need to replace a roof?
Every time it hails.
No.
That's not the answer you're looking
Probably
for.
about 20 years. How much does it cost?
More than $7,000.
Maybe not for this roof.
Yeah, that may be true.
Yeah. So, I mean, lower end roof, you're not putting something on that's going to last 40 years. It's not a class 4 hail resistant, can take a softball sized piece of hail and still be fine until that happens. And then suddenly it's not fine. I don't understand that either. But this is $7,000 for 20 years of a roof. I feel like that's pretty reasonable. Yeah. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a guy who came to class once who was like, you have to replace it like every 2 to 3 years. And it was like $3,000.
He's back. He's on tonight.
No, he's not. So anyway, exterior paint. Here's my prices. I'd normally stand in front of class and I would ask you, hey, how much do you think this costs? We'd all have a debate. And Asa says he was probably a roofer. Actually, I'm fairly sure he had one too many. So
he was barely standing up in class.
Yeah, it was a fun night, actually. I miss live classes for that reason.
Yes.
So HVAC, $2,000 every 20 years. We're assuming it doesn't have an air conditioner. This is just furnace, right? Appliances, $1,200 across 12 years. Water heater, $800, 12 years. I'm not going to read all these, right? I'm just going to kind of go through them and show you.
Go back for a second.
I'm going.
Pause on the screen so people want to pause it when they're watching the video. They have a second to actually pause it without getting to their mouse button stuff. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So this is the list of kind of how much and how often that I used for this specific property. I want to be clear. I don't think a roof in Fort Collins costs $7,000 because I know for a fact it does not because I've replaced a lot of them recently. So that's not true. Exterior paint, right? Maybe it's $2,000, but maybe it's $4,000 in Fort Collins, right? So it's really, this list is adapted for the property, right? The property that will inspire your desire. If you remember our first slide, that's this property. This is specific to that property and what I think I probably would have to pay to do that.
And you may have a lead on a cheaper source of this from one place or, okay.
I don't have to go.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's actually take a look at that. This is in the spreadsheet. You can plug all these numbers in for any town, any property you want, whatever you think the numbers are. And this is what it would look like, right? And if you look down here at the bottom, if everything was new when you bought the home, which it probably wasn't, but if it was, it would cost you $2,092, almost $2,093 per year to save so that you would have enough to pay for everything when it came due, which is $174 a month. So if everything is not new and your roof is 18 years old when you buy it and you only have 2 years to save the 7K, this isn't going to cut it. So again, in some ways, this is being, what do you call it? Anti-conservative?
Yeah, it's, you said
I feel
aggressive,
like that's like a political statement.
well,
It's hard to say.
yeah, I mean, it's just the opposite of being conservative, right? It's not aggressive. I guess it is aggressive, but
It is aggressive.
Yeah, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, we talked about all that stuff. So this is what James was trying to jump ahead to, which is, but I can do better than that. Brian, you're totally full of it. I can totally go get that stuff for way cheaper. James is like, yeah, he's totally full of it. This is also the last class I'm ever teaching, so enjoy.
Actually, I don't think you're on the calendar that much more, so this may literally be the last class you're teaching.
I'm literally on like 2 weeks from now.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So I agree. You totally might be able to do better than what I just listed. However, there's a big if to that. If you were on site, if you were managing the property yourself, if you were doing the work yourself, and or you had the right contacts, you already had a contractor on the ground who's doing a bunch of flips for you, then totally you can go kill the costs I just showed you because you're getting them at kind of contractor pricing and you're probably not marking it up. But in most cases, it's probably not going to work out like that. And even if you can make this work, isn't the long-term goal of what we're trying to do is to not do all of that crappy work? Like, to me, I look at that and I go, there's no chance I want to go save $200 by being on site and managing this thing myself to like save $200 on a water heater. That's ridiculous. Why would I ever want to do that? James, James is like this. This is how I know he has a question.
Well, I just want to give you a spot to pause. So Robert says, unlike last night where people were talking over each other, this is my polite way of saying, hey, I'm next for saying something. So anyway, Robert says, but if everything is half new, you should be closer to half. No. And I think it's actually closer to double.
Yes, it's inverse. So if you imagine that your roof is $7,000 to replace and you were going to save that 7K across 20 years, now you have to save 7K across 10 years. In order to be able to pay for it when it runs out of its life. It's double. So the shorter amount of time, if you only had a quarter of the time, it would be 400%.
What Brian was showing you was best case if you were starting with everything being brand new. And one of the things, before Brian made a spreadsheet and made it available to everybody, I had a spreadsheet, which we call Sasquatch because it's often talked about but never seen. It was overly complicated. And mine actually used to take into account the age of all of these different things where it said, hey, listen, the roof is $7,000. How much life do I have left on my current roof, on my current HVAC? And it would actually show you, hey, I need to have this saved up by this amount. And it would do all that math for you. But that's why it's not seen, is because it was crazy complicated and just way overkill for what the overwhelming majority of people would need.
Yeah. So Jason says 8K for cabinets. And I want to go back and make sure that we're clear. It's not 8K for cabinets. It's kitchen remodel and bathroom remodel. Right. So that together is 8K. That is actually like you fully remodeled the kitchen, like cabinets, countertops, sinks, like everything. Right. So, and if you can do a bathroom remodel for 3K, you're killing it. Like 5K for a bathroom remodel is really, probably more reasonable. But again, I tried to trim the costs here. Somebody just asked, what are components? So components are all of those things that you don't really think about, and they tend to, again, fall into a maintenance thing, right? You're not going to go spend $2,500 all at once on components, but components are like, I have fixtures in here, so electrical and plumbing. So fixtures is like a faucet, but components could be like, actual plumbing or actual, wiring that you actually have to go replace or update because you find out that it's not working correctly, or you need to go through and do something that is componentized in your house. It could be sewer related, it could be whatever, but it's really that stuff. All right. We talked about why we can't do better, but we might be able to. So here's our updated analysis. Result, unfortunately, is negative $41 per month, or almost negative 4% cash on cash. And you might be like, well, that sucks. This deal was fun. Class sucks. I'm out of here because Brian tried to bait and switch us with a great deal. Yes, that is negative cash flow. We basically went from what appeared to be and what people would probably try to sell you which is, hey, I've got this 20+% cash on cash deal. And instead of that, when you actually run the numbers, put real numbers in, you get negative cash on cash, right? Dude, where's my cash on cash? That's what Jason says. Yes, I agree. So non-loan expenses here are over 68%. What the heck is a non-loan expense, James? I know he's not there. So he'll get to listen to that at some point in the future. Be like, he asked me a question when I wasn't there. Yeah. So non-loan expenses are basically exactly what you think they are. It's all of your operating expenses, which in this case is about $5,500, and it's divided by your gross operating income, right? Which is your gross potential income after your vacancy. That gives you your gross operating income, kind of the income you actually expect to receive. So when you divide that, it's 68%. If I were to ask James, if he was still here, what's normal in Fort Collins, Loveland, Northern Colorado area for non-loan expenses, he would probably say, 30 to 40%, which I think is dead on. 68%, like anything over 50%, to me is a warning flag. So let's see if he actually complies. James, what do you think non-loan expenses are in Northern Colorado? What percent should that be?
Non-loan expenses, about a third.
So what percent is that?
33%.
See, look at that. He just complied. It was just amazing.
Is that what you were looking for?
He agreed. Yeah, I said 30 to 40 is what you'd say.
Yeah. I mean, when we look at that, we typically set aside about a third of your expenses on the property for a free and clear property for figuring out how much you'd make after the loan's paid off.
Yes. So 50%, usually a good rule of thumb. Anything over that starts to look really fishy to me. This also assumes it's a B-class property. If not, your maintenance, your management, your CapEx may actually be higher. But hang on. You all thought it was like, oh, this is a bad deal. Next slide. Let's see the next deal, Brian, or let's talk about something else. Wait. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad deal. Just because you have bad cash flow doesn't make a deal bad. And you're like, really? That seems crazy. That's just one of the 4 ways we can make money. So we need to actually do, what'd you just do? Oh, I thought you put 5 up. I was like, awesome.
4 ways. Technically, we'll find out next week that there are 5, but
sure. That's why I was like, how many fingers did you put up? 5, 4. Yes. So let's talk about the other 3: depreciation, appreciation, and loan paydown. Start with depreciation and tax benefits. Here's our purchase price, and it was our assessed value. We're just going to assume because that gives us kind of a favorable look, again, anti-conservative, as James calls it, towards this deal. So 15% land value gives us $9,400, leaving about $54,000 that we can actually depreciate. You can't depreciate your total purchase price. Some of it is actually the building, which we're allowed to depreciate. Some of it is actually the land, which you are not. So consult your CPA, consult your tax advisor, but this generally will result in $1,944 in depreciation per year. Well, that's kind of cool. That's across 27 and a half years. So this offsets about $408 per year of taxes that you would have paid if you're in the 21% effective tax bracket. So whatever you would have earned by having $1,944 in essentially a deduction from depreciation, you get to save $408 of paying tax. That's extra $408 in your pocket. Right, James?
Yes. There's some detail there, but yes, that's really good generalization of that.
Yeah. So James would say, think of this as additional cash flow, as he said many times in many classes. And I'm like, yeah, you're not paying tax. So you have to actually treat it as you got it as cash flow. You can't just go spend it and think, oh yeah, I didn't pay as much tax this year. So after we include cash flow from the depreciation, we basically are at about negative $88 profit per year. So we're getting closer. So what is loan paydown going to do for this? From a previous NCREG class, James, I know you know this number. Maybe we should ask the audience.
Yeah,
poll the audience. If you type the correct number in, James, what are you going to do?
I'm going to give him your home phone number.
You better get it to 8 decimal places then. Yeah.
No one even knows what the question is yet.
Yeah.
They're like throwing out random numbers. They don't even know what you're asking.
Yeah. You guys are, Robert and Jason, you're both wrong. 50% and 10% to 142 are all incorrect. So the question is, What is the return across the life of a 30-year fixed loan? What is the rate of return that you would get? It's fixed. Doesn't matter what your interest rate is. By paying off the loan across 30 years, what is the actual ROI of that loan?
You have to tell them the down payment amount.
20%. Okay. Jason is remarkably close. Jason has been listening to all the classes. He says 5.56%. It is actually 5.51%. So well done, but amazingly close. That's like butterfly wings causing a hurricane. Like, you keep compounding that, it'll happen. But this assumes everything else is break even. Basically, the return on your loan paydown is 5.51%. So that, of course, unfortunately, on this property assumes that you can actually get a loan. How many banks are actually going to give you a loan for, I don't know, $50-some thousand to buy a $62,000, $63,000 house? Probably not a lot. So I think that's another concern here, is that you might end up just having to pay cash or have private financing.
Yeah, there probably are some lenders that specialize in this. I don't know for sure because I don't tend to invest in this part of the market, but I suspect that there are specialists in those local markets that deal with these types of properties.
Yeah. And right now, I mean, you can probably get a much lower rate if you could get a loan from a bank than you could from a private lender, right? So private money makes this look worse, like in terms of cash flow.
Yeah, you're probably not getting those low interest. What did you assume for your interest rate on this? You remember? Early on?
It's in the 4s.
Okay.
Yeah, low 4s. So we'll look at what happens if you actually pay cash here in a few minutes. But let's talk about appreciation. What is the appreciation for this property going to be? It's going to be 10%, 5%, 3%, 0%. What do you think, James?
I think you're seeing at least 20% raw appreciation per year in this property.
Only if you're adding staircases of gold. Yeah. So in 5, 10, and 15 years, yeah, you can still get a portfolio loan. Interest rate's still going to be higher than you getting an investment loan from Fannie. So in any case, right? I mean, that's what Robert said, right? Yeah, you can probably go get a loan, but it's not going to be like, think about the amount of time you spend getting a loan. Would you rather spend the same amount of time getting a loan for $45,000, or would you rather get a loan for $300,000? And would you rather take a loan spot up with a $45,000 loan, or would you rather take a loan spot up with a $300,000 loan? Right. It's like $300K is a no-brainer to me.
And your portfolio loans are likely to be adjustable rate mortgages. They may be fixed for the first 5 years or 7 years or whatever it is, but they tend to be ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, for portfolio loans. Not exclusively, but that's probably more often than not.
Yep. Yeah. And Jason says 7-year ARM about 4% right now. And I don't know what the investment rate is, but I bet it's lower. So
yeah. The interest rate for like owner occupied, I saw some quotes today for a client of ours, and it's like par was like 2.625.
Yeah. This isn't owner occ though.
Right. I agree. And I'm just pointing that out because they're like ridiculously low right now. They've dipped.
Yes, no doubt. So at 5% appreciation, we'd be worth $80K, $103, and $131. There's 3% appreciation, $73K, $85K, $98K. So those look really good, right? You bought a property for about $60,000, and maybe 15 years later, it's worth $130. So it's more than doubled, or it's worth $100, and it's, getting close to doubling. Like, those seem like, hey, well, there's, $40, $50, $60,000 that the property's going to appreciate. That's great. But I want to take a brief journey back in time. We're going to rewind time and see what we actually find. When I actually first taught this class in 2015, I actually pulled a property that was $45,000, is 726 square feet, close proximity comp at 48.5. Rent was $700 per month. So I want you to think about this. The data that's in here tonight is actually from 2019. So it's really 2015 to 2019. But $700 a month, if you guys remember what our rent was on our house that we're looking at now. And the cash on paper looked about like $233 a month. I kid you not, I did not plan this, right? Like 23.29%. After you did the actual analysis that we just went through on our property, when you did it on this property, it was about $34 a month, or 3.38% cash on cash. And this is my favorite probably slide of the night. This is what my spreadsheet used to look like. It's like a kid got a hold of some highlighters and just really made a mess. I don't know who got him the orange one, because usually it's just yellow and green, but the orange one came out. So this is what the spreadsheet used to look like. It just shows, hey, this is what the deal actually looked like. Non-loan expenses, again, well over 50%. They were getting close to 68. It was calculated slightly differently in this spreadsheet because I had just done it wrong, because I did this like 8 years ago or something. So, we correct things over time. Everybody makes mistakes.
Hey, before you go from that slide,
yeah.
I didn't get the point of what you were saying. So you're saying that
I'm not done.
Oh, okay. That's fine. That's why I didn't get the point. I was like,
yeah, there's no point yet.
Okay.
I just want to come back and show you, like, here's 2015, right? So fast forward to 2019 today.
Yeah.
Because everything's different this year. So we're just going to ignore this year. So this was literally the property, the first one that I actually found when I was searching the last time I taught this class. Turns out it happened to be from exactly the same company as the other property. And this is, don't let this 2-bedroom, 1-bath property fool you. It's newly renovated. I want you to take note of that. And is located in one of the bread and butter zip codes. Do you have a list of bread and butter zip codes in the MLS, James?
I do, actually. It's a check mark.
Yeah, that's awesome. He's joking, in case you're wondering. So it has everything you want, especially the cash flow. Do you want in? So yes. What do you expect this to look like when I show you a picture of what's inside? It's newly renovated.
That'd be nice.
Okay. So it turns out, and James is going to be very unhappy because of this slide, because we're about to go from regular to explicit on this slide.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So he has to mark this explicit. So it turns out this is the same company, and it was totally random. I was just Google searching. Here was their new website with updated marketing. And I'm showing you this partly because I'm seriously amused at this, and also because it's just crazy, right? This is actually what's on their webpage. And I was like, okay, well, that's awesome. So yeah, I mean, you're appealing to people who are like, yeah, I don't want to be like normal. I get it. No problem. And then there's a questionnaire that basically said, yo, how many properties did you actually, want to own? And you can either own 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 20, or you could just own a whole shitload. Like, and there's no way I can't put this in here because it's hysterical, right?
It's not even hyphenated.
It's just awesome. And it's all capitalized. I mean, so many things are wrong. So, I mean, I would collect the whole shitload every day of the week. So their sales pitch here is also scarcity, right? And we here like to live in the abundance mindset, but I'm pointing this out not to make fun of this company or whatever. It's really so that you understand when you see this, you can't take it necessarily at face value, right? You have to go and you have to think on your own and say, hey, why would you be pitching it this way? And this is literally what it says. This is not for everyone. If you're ready for a true hands-off, we'll take care of everything for you approach to real estate investing, we welcome you to fill out our investor application form. That seems fair. Still undecided? Download our free ebook, A Perfect Storm, U.S. Property Investment for Australians. That's interesting. Written for Australian investors. It's valid for investors in the U.S. or anywhere else in the world.
So maybe for Australians, maybe not.
Yeah. So it turns out this property also happens to be in Toledo, right? Probably because that's where their bread and butter zip code is. So rent on this property is $750. Here's the tax. Here's the insurance, the property management. What do you think the price of this property is, James?
The same as the one before.
$60,000. So it turns out from 2015, we examined a $45,000 property. In 2016, we examined a $60,000 property. That's basically the same as this one, getting the same rent, but it's 4 years later. What happened between 2015 and 2019 in most of the U.S.?
Property values went up.
Property values went up. What else went up?
Taxes, insurance, rents.
And rents.
Actually, right? So here's a really interesting side note, and then we do have a question in the chat window. So tomorrow in the newsletter, I will send you a special gift. It's like a link to a class that we did, and in that class, Brian and I went over an entire 2-hour class on cash flow markets versus appreciation markets. And in that class, I went over a chart showing you using census data to show what the appreciation rate was from, I think, 2010 to 2018 for both price appreciation and rent appreciation in a whole bunch of markets, like, I don't know, 300 markets in the US. And I show you how many of them had negative appreciation for price and how many of them had negative rent appreciation, how many had positive appreciation, how much had positive rent appreciation. And I can show you graphically the rent versus price appreciation, how they all worked out. So go watch that class tomorrow. It'll be up for a little while in the newsletter.
Cool. Was there a question?
Oh, the question in the thing. Yeah. The question was, I'm thinking of buying a beautiful brick house in a good neighborhood built in 1910 from online auction. Is it a good idea? Do CapEx numbers? We were talking over each other. So the Brian's answer was no. Do CapEx numbers change significantly due to the age of the property?
Absolutely. So I owned a property that was built roughly in the same time. And you will have I had to go in and take knob and tube wiring out because it's not allowed. It's dangerous. Could set the house on fire, right? You're going to have all sorts of other issues that you're not used to, right? And whether or not you should buy it, I'm joking. Is it a good idea? When you ask, is it a good idea for something like this, I would have to know like literally 2 hours of information as to actually figure out whether it's a good idea for you personally, right? If this is your 300th house and you're adding it to your portfolio and you're covering it, then great. If it's your very first house, probably not. And if you're buying it for yourself, all bets are off, right? You do what you want. If you're buying it because you want it to make a great rental, then I don't care that it's beautiful. I don't care that it's brick. I don't care that it's 1910. I care what the numbers look like that are reasonable numbers. And so really you have to go run the numbers, do the investigation. And it's hard for us to answer that question in an accurate way at all in 1 minute.
Yeah, it's not even possible. I don't think it's whether it's accurate. A couple things from the discussion thing. I don't know what cost of labor for Reno was, but Bob says the class that I was telling you about that's going to be for tomorrow about cash flow versus appreciation was really good. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. And Robert also says, I've also wondered how that worked out, appreciation versus pure cash flow rentals returns. Glad you did some analysis. Yeah, it was like a 2-hour class on just that topic. And honestly, I could have done a weekend on it. It was like, it wasn't enough done in that particular class, but I did show some really interesting examples of ways to make it work. And then Claire says, where is that chart for appreciation over the years?
In the class.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's in that class tomorrow. There's some charts, although you may be asking about, I'm reading into your question. You may be asking about something different than what in the class, but watch the class tomorrow and tell me if you need something. Reach out via email if you need to. Sorry.
Yes.
Brian.
So back to where we were, 2015, 2016, 2019, kind of all look the same, even though our overall U.S. economy did really well. Our kind of rents went up, house prices went up, and yet somehow this property is still $60,000. So, not on the appreciation. How is this the next slide? That's what I'm like, this seems like it's out of order. So what do you think the appreciation is going to be? Because that's really where we were, right? Like, is appreciation going to be 1%, 3%, 5%? And so for a similar property that was advertised previously, there was a note being used to advertise how amazing it was for a $45,000 purchase price house. And this was the note. All-time high sale price for this property was $64,000 in 2001. You might read that at first and think, sweet, I'm getting like 20K off. But then you stop to think and you go, wait, 18 years ago, this house sold for $64,000 and I'm about to buy it for $45,000. This isn't a year or two difference in a recession. This is 2 freaking decades. And the house is worth less? No, that's just not right.
Hey, but you're going to cash flow to the bank or whatever the same.
You are not. Yeah. So, and it's really, 14 years, 19 years, 18 years, that's insane. If I bought a house in Fort Collins and it was 70% of the price, a decade and a half later, I'd be pissed. I would be really happy. That's actually hard to do. There's a chart that I showed one time in class where it's like in the US in general, if you took any like 15-year span, it's like impossible to find a place where home values went down across a 15-year span. But we found it. It's right here.
In Toledo.
We found the market where it's pulling everyone else down.
Man.
So when is this property going to go up in value? And like James likes to say, I don't even remember what he thinks my one key point is tonight, but this is to me probably the most important thing that you can do when you're looking at out-of-state properties, or you're looking at, hey, this deal looks really amazing on paper. The cash flow looks really good. You have to go do the research on what the market actually has done and what you think it's going to do, right? If your market has been flat for 30 years, what do you think the price of this house is going to be in 10 more years? Probably the same that it is today, or in this case, 70% less, right?
So let me be devil's advocate.
Sure.
And this is not what I necessarily believe, but I want to be fair when we kind of talk about these things. So a market that has been kind of like suppressed or it's kind of snaking along, not really going up in value for a decade or 2 decades or whatever, isn't that primed to then explode because it's all underpriced compared to the rest of the US, and everybody's going to look around from California and New York and all the expensive states and say, hey, I want to go live in Toledo because it's $500,000 for a 1-bedroom place in California. And I could go live in this, 3-bedroom palatial estate in Toledo for $75,000. I mean,
no, I don't think that's, I mean, the next thing you should do once you understand what the appreciation rate is I didn't say understand just appreciation, right? I said, understand your market. So when we do market stats and I bring data back, I try to show like migration of people. Are people moving into this area? Are people moving out? What does the employment scene look like, right? It's not simply, hey, what did it do for the last 10 years? It's what's going on with the economy in this region? What's going on in this neighborhood, right? Like if this neighborhood is just kind of dying off, who's going to buy there, right? Probably not anyone. If you're going to buy the whole neighborhood, fix it up, regentrify it, more power to you, but that's probably not what's going to happen.
Hey, so Jason says Case-Shiller, which 2 economists, the Case-Shiller Index, Housing Index, shows that across the last 100 years or so, American home prices have appreciated only 0.2% above inflation.
Yep.
Over that time period. And so I quote this a lot of times when I talk about why appreciation really, in my mind, is like inflation. And so if you have a 2 or 3% inflation rate, then over a very long period of time, home prices on a national level, which is not really the reality, but over a very large area, tend to go up about 2 to 3% per year. And so that's historically what the numbers say. Who knows if that'll hold true, but I think over a long period of time, to think that home prices will keep pace with inflation seems very reasonable to me.
Yep. And I have one other word to add to that. It's leverage. Right?
Oh yeah,
That's
when we talk about
inflation, right?
Yeah, when we talk about buying the houses, you're not putting 100% down, so your money's not keeping pace with inflation. It's being multiplied by whatever your leverage factor is. So if you put 20% down, you're really doing 5 times what inflation is. If you're putting 5% down buying this Nomad, you're doing 20 times whatever the inflation / appreciation, which we're saying is the same number over a large data set.
Yep. So they're not going up in value. Probably because this isn't a desired neighborhood, right? People aren't migrating into this area. They're migrating away from the area. And so a lot of that has to do with what does this market look like, right? And if it's not actually keeping pace with the inflation thing that we just discussed, really you're losing money. It's like if you stick $100 in your mattress versus $100 in a savings account that somehow miraculously had the interest rate that matched inflation, right? Your $100 in your mattress is eventually going to be worth nothing. Whereas the $100 in the savings account will eventually be worth exactly $100 in same buying power.
Yeah. You can buy I bonds or I bills or whatever they're called, where they actually are intended to keep pace with inflation.
Sure. So here's what appreciation looks like at 3%. Average inflation is 3.2% over the last 100 years in the US. There we go. We're just like slides ahead. You guys going to be banned. I'm going to just ban both of you right now. And
the rest what are you going to ban me for? I'm trying to help you. I'm reading you the stuff.
So in my opinion, this is the absolute best possible outcome for this particular house, right? And this is the years across the top, 1 out to 35, right? House gets paid off at 30 if you got a loan, which we're still assuming. And down here we have total profit. So in year 5, you've made $10,000 in profit on this house. In year 10, $25,000 total, not like that year. So let me walk through things before you ask your question. ROI, right? That's just return on investment. That's the overall ROI. So takes simply the number divided by what you invested. The annualized ROI is actually divide that number that you made, so your $907 in total profit in year 1, by what you had to invest, and then divide by the number of years it's been invested. So you can think of this as simple interest. If you invested $100 in an account and every year they paid you 10%, but they didn't pay compound interest, they'd pay you $10, $10, $10. That's what that number means. The one below that, compound ROI, basically says, hey, this is what your interest rate would have been if we were compounding from day 1. That's why that one you see it kind of drop, significantly off, especially the further out you get out to year 20, it's like 9.65. James, what's your question?
I don't even remember now. Oh, I was going to point out the sales cost, but I think you're going to talk about that in a few slides.
I am going to talk about that.
Okay,
so
good.
This is 2% sales cost. And why do I have 2% sales costs? Because I'm trying to cut costs, right? Again, this is the best possible outcome. You're probably lease optioning this. But if you looked at a spreadsheet that we've done in other classes and you're like, Brian, like when you're doing lease option before, like you have 0 in there or like 0.5. And I'm like, yeah, but the problem is 2% of the price of this property when it sells isn't a lot of money, right? When you look at this $1,300 of sales costs, right? That's like some title work, and that's really, you're going to spend that fairly quickly. If you're able to get the buyer to pay all the costs, then that's great. You can put it at 0, but you have to raise that percentage in this case in order to actually make that work. Anything else?
Oh, see, look at that. I'm 2 bullet points ahead of you.
Yeah, you're slowing down. You were like 2 slides ahead of me.
Oh, sorry.
So again, I think appreciation at 3% is probably like a perfect storm and you're good. Appreciation at 0%. This is a more likely outcome given what I showed you, right? In this particular market. So this is what that looks like. Is anyone interested in buying this property? You're going to make $4,500 in year 10. If you look at those annualized and compound return percentages, they're just really low, right? James.
And when you were looking up the old property, did you by chance plug in the old address and like look up on, one of these automated valuation websites to determine what the value according to the estimated dealio is?
I did not, and I'm not actually sure I have full addresses.
Okay, fair enough.
Yep. So you look at this and you go, well, I don't know anyone who's buying that, right? Are you going to do 10 years of work to make $4,500? No freaking way, right? Like, just no. So there's still a lot of downside that we haven't even included in here. So let's take a look at rent sensitivity for this same property. Rent increase, we're going to move that from 2%. So in the original analysis, we had, hey, rents are going to increase 2% every single year. I'm literally going to do nothing else but move the 2% to 1%, because 1% is for winners, right? Because number 1. So let's see if we're a winner. This is what that looks like. Wow. Look at these numbers. I mean, they're negative and then they're basically 0. I mean, or they're 1, because it is a winner. It's number 1, like literally across the board, right? So this is crazy. Our year 30 profit, not year 35, our year 30 profit in the previous one where we had 3% appreciation went from 38,000 down to 4,000. There's no chance you're buying this property to work for 30 years to make $4,300.
Well, Brian, that's 30 years from now. That's inflated money. So is that worth more or less today?
It's like $0 in today's money. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
So this is why you have to go and you have to do the analysis. So, I am in a sense making fun of this property a little bit because, the analysis shows it's just really hard to make money. And if you start playing with the numbers and you start looking at, hey, what's my rent sensitivity? How sensitive is this to change? Guess what happens if I move this to 0? This property is going to be negative. right? If you don't get any rent increases, which is probably not reasonable. Rent's probably eventually going up, but not by a lot and not very often. So everyone out there, all 43 of you that are like, dude, you're so unreasonable. Like, this is the dumbest class I've ever been to. I just wish I was in club person so I could raise my hand and point out how dumb you are. So fine. I'm gonna like, yes. Who raised their hand? Did you just raise your hand?
I didn't actually. That wasn't me this time.
Oh, Robert raised his hand. All right. Robert's banned. Just kidding. So here's 1.5% appreciation. I'm going to give in. I'm going to say, okay, 1.5% appreciation, 1% rent increase, right? Well, that's got to be decent. So here's what it looks like. And you can look at this and go, hey, are you willing to work for 5 years to make $5,000 or 10 years to make 11 grand? Or, you know, are you willing to own this property to make that? James, in other classes, we've talked about kind of our ballpark number of like, hey, if we're going to go do a deal, what's kind of the minimum per year that we want to make?
I think you have your number, and for nomads, it's very different than 20% down or 25% down. But I think over 20% seems like a reasonable like threshold for me.
So if you and I were going to go do a deal, what dollar amount would we want to make per year? That's what.
Dollar amount?
Yeah,
I think at least 10K.
At least 10K, which is exactly my same number. Right? If you're not going to make 10K in year 1 and another 10K in year 2 and another 10K in year 3, for us in our marketplace, it's just probably not worth the effort that we have to put in to deal with all of it. And so when you look at this, it's like you're making 10K after 10 years. There's just no way I want to do that. And some people, this may actually be something they're willing to do.
And that's not per year.
Yeah. This is 11K total in year 10. And that's with 1.5% appreciation and 1% rent increase.
Are you going to get to the point where we talk about this being really close to the ground?
Oh God, why do you do that every year? And I just have to point out that Cody says that's why you buy a shitload of them. Since we're explicit, we'll just be explicit.
Might as well brace it now because it's got to get marked that.
That's right. So, I mean, would you buy this property? I am not buying this property, right? Like 8%, 9%, like 6% compounded. We can do so much better. So what if you just pay cash? Because that's obviously the next question. Well, screw the loan thing. I'm just going to pay cash and it'll cash flow even better because I don't have a loan to pay. Yeah. Well, let's take a look and see what that does. Obviously, we talked about it's hard to get a loan, but hey, it's got to be way better, right? Well, here it is. And does it look a lot better? No, it still does not look a lot better. It still looks like it sucks, right? It's just 4%, 5%. It actually got worse because you lost your 5.51% return on the loan paydown. So it doesn't look better when you pay cash. And again, in your head, you might think, well, it should look better because I would have more coming in. But this is why we created the spreadsheet, so that you can actually go test what you think and actually see if you're right or wrong, because you don't want to guess before you buy a property.
But it is a lot more dollar amount profit.
It is more dollar amount profit, but you also bought in cash, right?
And what did you use for appreciation? Is this the 1.5?
Yes.
Okay.
I assume. Yes. Yeah. Right there. 1.5.
Yeah. Robert, go ahead and ask your question. I'll read it and read it to Brian.
So as the price gets lower, things get worse. Imagine if this purchase price was $30,000 and rent's $500 a month or so, right? The problem is that this is James's favorite point. Most of the CapEx items still cost the same. Just because you have a, 800 square foot house that costs you $30,000 doesn't mean your water heater only costs $400 compared to the house that's twice as expensive where it costs $800. Your water heater still costs the same. So as a percentage of your house price and as a percentage of the rent that you're going to receive, it's much larger percentage-wise as an expense. And that becomes a huge issue, especially with larger ticket items. So even if you reduce the cost of all the things by 20%, it still doesn't look good. Maintenance items still cost the same. You're a furnace service guy. Even if you only had a service once every 5 years, he's still not charging you like $50 instead of $100. He's still going to charge you full price for doing his job on a furnace, right? And again, this makes the percent of rent that you get that you have to spend even higher. And that's really dangerous. Management, same thing. Even if you assume a flat 10% fee works, it's still a higher percentage of what you're spending. It's not good. And non-loan expenses are obviously going to be even higher now. And we're still being really conservative. Or, well, yeah, aggressive in the sense. But yes, go ahead.
So Robert asks, did you say that you don't do a deal unless you get 20% cash on cash return?
No, I wish. That would be amazing. Yeah, I mean, I've shared my actual criteria in another class. I don't even know what class that was. One of the other 3,000 classes we have.
I think it's how to get your next deal done. You talk about your deal criteria. And then I did a 2-hour class on establishing your deal criteria.
Yeah. Wasn't yours a workshop though? Like you
helped it was intended to be a workshop where we went through a worksheet together. Yeah.
Yeah. And so no, I don't have to get 20% cash on cash. And in a lot of cases, I mean, that's just literally impossible in our market. Right now, I mean, if you're break even with 20% down, it's probably a deal in our market because our market's appreciating more rapidly than rents are going up.
So I think he's asking, why did we say 20% return on investment? Then, like,
this 20% right here on the CapEx bullet.
No, we were talking before about like, well, how much do you need to make per year? And before that, I wasn't understanding your question. I said 20% per year return. And so I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah. So that is not here. I'll back up. The 20% that James is referring to is not cash on cash. It's total return. So he's looking down here in the like annualized ROI number. He's wanting that number to be 20, which I think 20, 30, 40. I mean, I like all of those numbers in that range.
And so what does that take into account? So the return on investment, you're saying cash on cash, which is just cash flow. It's the upper right corner of that return on investment quadrant we talk about. The other 4 areas include appreciation, debt pay down, depreciation from tax benefits, and also the cash flow. So those 4 combined will be over 20%.
And please note that in this particular version of the spreadsheet, this does not include cash flow from depreciation. It says it right here.
Yeah, and part of it is because at sale, you actually pay back depreciation. It's actually an expense. You pay tax on depreciation recapture. So it really washes out when you have a sale. But like year over year, you can look at that number and see what it will be.
Yep. So that's the 20%. So, okay, what if I buy a more expensive house? Great. Here's a $110,000 house. Want to guess where it is? Toledo.
Why are you picking on Toledo?
I swear I did not like pick on any. I literally did searches and I picked what came up.
We had 3 people on here from Ohio. They all left after like 10 minutes.
Whatever. Well, then they're missing out. So $110,000, 2,000 square feet, $1,200 in rent. So, hey, the rent is higher here, which is good, but it's like twice the house, right? Tax is $2,440, which boggled me for a little while. Insurance is $1,200. Property management is $1,440. It turns out the tax is higher because this lot is huge, and so whatever they were doing, it's a huge. I don't remember how big the lot was, but it's pretty big. So here's a picture of what the inside of this house looks like. I don't know if that looks like it's totally renovated to you, but it doesn't look totally renovated to me. I want to point out a few things. One, I'm not sure what's going on with the flooring. It looks really dirty. And yes, Jason says, nice oven. That's actually not an oven because the oven actually goes right here. This is like a non-working, is my guess, old relic that you just get to look at that takes up storage space. So my point of showing this picture is literally, hey, you saw this picture and you saw this and you looked at and you ran the numbers and you're like, hey, this actually looks like a deal. This doesn't seem to be a pig. And you don't go look at your property in person. And then, your tenant moves in and they open the door and they go to move in. They send you this picture like, hey, it's not clean. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, what did I buy? At least I would. So
why is there a mirror to the left of the cabinets in the living room area like that?
Yes. So it is unclear why there's a mirror here. This is apparently where you look at yourself before you get your dishes out of the glass cabinets. I have no idea. Just making fun of useless stuff. So here's another picture of the same house. Paint looks new. Windows, I don't think they're new based on the locks that are on them. But paint looks good, but the carpet is definitely not new. It looks like it has some staining. The fireplace like has, I don't know, black soot on like the brick. Like there's a huge mirror, which apparently they got a deal on mirrors. It's how they make the house look bigger.
That's true. That is true. That's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, you can see, I mean, I don't know if you can actually see the light above the front door, but that's an old light. That's like a 1960s, 70s light. So if you didn't go see that and then you found out that's what you bought, I think you would probably be really upset and probably not do more of these deals. I think that's what happens a lot of the time. People see this on paper and they go, oh, that's a great deal, I'm going to buy it. And they don't go look at it. They don't go look at the neighborhood, and they get themselves in trouble. So here's some quick results. I assumed 1% annual rent increase, 1% appreciation, 5% vacancy, which is likely low, 10% management, and 15% maintenance. $150 a month in CapEx, which is also likely low. I'm giving this house the benefit of the doubt. I'm giving it all the benefit I can give it. No sales costs. Why not? Right? The result is still negative 3% cash on cash, but I guarantee it's being sold as a huge deal. And so this is why, if you take nothing else away from the class, you have to run your own numbers. You have to think about the property you're buying on your own in order to come to the conclusion that makes sense for you.
But Brian, these are 1% deals, right? Like the 1% rule deals?
Yeah, it's fantastic. $1,200 for a $110,000 house. 1% of the rent equals 1% of the purchase price equals your rent. But that doesn't mean it's a deal. You have to run the numbers. So annualized ROI, return on investment, in year 10 is 8.78% for this house. It tops out at around 9.28 after about 35 years. So again, if you bought with cash, it's cash flow positive now, 4.27%, which is good. But that annualized ROI number doesn't get above 5.27% now. So still not great. You could instead just buy a nicer property and make 5.51% by simply having a 30-year fixed loan and paying it off. Like, that's literally the comparison. Like, you could buy a nicer house, have less problems, and make 5.51% just by having a loan that pays off and everything else broke even.
Yeah, but the argument to be made is one of them is cash flow today, money in your pocket each month. The other one is, well, I guess that is ROI. It's not cash on cash, right? Go back a slide. Or is that the same slide?
I did, yeah.
Your annualized ROI is 5.27. So that's actually everything. That's not just cash flow.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's literally like if you bought a house and it broke even and you paid the loan off across 30 years, you would do better. So go do that. So for all of the doubters, there's only 40 of you left. So, 7 of the doubters.
Let's see if we can get to zero.
Yeah, trying to get to zero. Because if we get to zero, it means everyone understands.
We'll keep going until there's no one left. We got like a million slides of examples.
Yeah. So Jason's like, I'm never leaving. We'll have to ban Jason to get him off. So
Robert says you keep banning him.
So, Brian, I still think you're being way unfair with CapEx costs.
Agreed.
Yeah, of course you can source the water heater for $400, and yes, the furnace, but I'm not even including some of the costs that you're going to run into in these analyses, right? Are you going to be able to predict the future and exactly what happens and estimate everything exactly? Because if you don't, it's going to be really hard for you to make money on these deals. There's currently $0 allocated to evictions, court costs, tax returns. Oh, you have to pay for those? Oh, I mean, maybe you do them yourself. Maybe you get them wrong and get audited. Maybe you have to pay more tax, right? There's umbrella insurance. There's asset protection. Like if you are actually running a business and you're including all of your expenses, all of these things need to be included too. You start including this, these deals look worse than worse. I mean, they just look terrible.
Yeah, so, I want to talk about one other thing,
sure.
And that is that when you have a lower purchase price, which usually means a lower down payment, like dollar amount wise, and it could be the same percentage, and you have unexpected variance in your returns, it is amplified by the smaller denominator you have when you're figuring out your return. So if you miscalculate by $500 on a $300,000 property, the percentage you're off by in your return is much smaller than if you're off by the same $500 on a $50,000 property, just because your denominator of what you had to invest in the beginning was so much smaller. And on a related question, which I'm not sure you want to go into now, CCS, the question is, why does the appreciation go more negative the less money you put down from the spreadsheet? Shouldn't appreciate similarly regardless of financing? Did you catch that question?
I did. I figured you were just going to answer it.
Oh, I thought you were going to answer it because I didn't even think about it. I just like read it to you.
So I assume it's because of the multiplier, right? If you put less down, I don't know exactly what deal you're looking at. And so part of it is hard to answer that question, but
it honestly may be what I just said. It may be that when it goes down,
right,
it gets amplified because you have a smaller down payment amount. That may be what's going on, but I'd have to see the actual spreadsheet to be able to really look at it and give you a good answer.
Yeah, we can take that after the class too and drill in. So not to mention that if you actually go do all the work on the property yourself and something happens to the tenant and you get sued and you lose the property, that's even worse. So hopefully you saw asset protection a long time ago, or you are a vaulted member.
It's in premium.
That you can actually go listen to that. So the bottom line here, yes, you may just be able to win with one of these properties if things go really well. But I think eventually the law of averages is going to win out. However, if you win with one, quit and never do it again. If you go to Vegas and you've never been and you place a $100 bet on blackjack and you win, just leave. You'll always be a winner. So let's examine a higher price rent scenario. $370,000 purchase price, $2,200 rent. This is what it looked like in 2016. Lower vacancy of 3%. It's easier to rent. This is a Fort Collins house or a Loveland house, Northern Colorado, whatever you want to call it. This is what it looks like. Management, 10%. There's no minimums in play. Maintenance, look at this. 12% gives us $3,000 a year. You can do a lot with $3,000 a year, right? Oh, you're having to replace carpet or, redo flooring or redo paint. Like $3,000 a year goes a lot further than like $873. I include $1,000 a year in here just for ordinary stuff. And then carpet and paint at $7,000, way more expensive, right? Every 5 years, which gives us $1,400 a year. And I updated the CapEx for the larger house. Non-loan expenses are right exactly where we would expect them to be, about 35%, which is way better, right? You're spending less on things that aren't related to your loan, right? You're spending less on your expenses for the property. However, cash flow is negative. It's $360 a month negative. However, the interest rates have come down since I actually did this, so it's probably not that negative, which is awesome. But
do you remember what you used for this?
It's probably the same, same 4.25-ish.
Okay.
If you want to hang on, I can actually tell you.
It's not a big deal.
Oh, all right. Then I won't tell you.
Okay. 4.5 is what it was.
Perfect. So imagine if this property met the 1% rule and it was, $3,700 a month in rent. It would be amazing. So long-term of the higher priced house at 3% appreciation, this is what it looks like, right? Here's your numbers. At 5% appreciation, because James, what did our market do in the last 5 years?
More than 5, but I don't think that's a reasonable number to use long term.
I agree.
Yeah.
But these numbers again look really amazing. And for those of you that were astute and were like, wait a minute, Brian, this is BS. Aren't those returns almost identical? And kind of, yes. If you compare the best possible outcome of the lower priced house that we looked at to a very conservative outcome of the higher priced house, then yes. However, maintenance is likely overestimated for the higher priced house, right? That higher priced house is probably going to be way newer. It's going to be easier to rent because it's newer. It's going to be in probably a newer neighborhood, which is going to make it a desirable neighborhood more than an older neighborhood in most cases. You'll probably have a better tenant pool. And so the problem here is that all of the benefit of the doubt assumptions that we gave that lower priced house really probably aren't likely to occur. And so that higher priced house right, ends up being a better deal. And it's probably going to perform way better than even the conservative estimates that we used in here. So this might be James's favorite slide of the night. I'm not sure. So maybe not.
Hey, before we go here, there are some questions.
Sure,
So
let's hit them.
Jason says it is 100% acceptable for people to screw up their tax returns. He won't explain why for risk of being banned. He also says that you should teach a pure poker class. So it must be unrelated. Another casino joke. Except if, and Cece says, except if a bunch of giant companies makes Toledo home and then everything skyrockets. But I wouldn't buy on speculation, though.
Sure. I mean, at what point do you pick what town, right? And the problem with that is there are definitely people that have picked a town, and I will use Las Vegas because I live there and I literally witnessed this happen, right? Or technically I showed up right after it happened. So Las Vegas literally calculated, hey, we're adding like, I don't even know what it was, some crazy number of new influx of people every month. And so they built homes to match that. And it turns out they were wrong. That many people were not moving there. And then they had 5,000 vacant homes in the city. And what happens then? Not good stuff. Yeah. So if you know, I mean, if you have some like connection with inside information that, you know, some company is about to build, you know, a really good house here. And I'll even give you an example. And CC, I don't remember if you're local or not, but Fort Collins had kind of a rundown mall, and a company came in and was like, hey, we're going to like basically redo the entire thing. They kicked some old tenants out, and everyone was like, man, if you live around the mall, like your house price is probably going to go up because people are going to want to be close to that thing. Yep. Well, I don't know how many years we're into this. The mall is half done, like, and there's enough stores that half of it is open, but they can't keep tenants in the restaurants. The mall is not what it was supposed to have been. And so if you bought based on that speculation, you probably aren't seeing any return on that.
Yeah. So it's a dangerous thing to do. Another couple questions. Sure. Steven says, do you change out, carpet more often than LVP, luxury vinyl plank?
Yeah. And yes. I mean, this totally depends on your tenant. But sometimes you'll have carpet in the house and the tenant will stay there for 12 years and you won't change it. Sometimes you'll have carpet and you'll have to change it after one tenant. If you put LVP in, the goal is that it lasts longer. And in general, what we've seen is that it does last longer. And it's easier to clean because it's literally just kind of a mop and you're done. But somebody who wants to be reckless can take a box cutter and totally destroy your floor very quickly. And that's part of the problem. You know, you get people that are like, oh, it's just a tile or a linoleum floor and we're going to drag our stuff all over it and leave scratch marks. So it really depends on what kind of LVP you're putting in and how well you're taking care of it. But yes, LVP should last longer.
And you can spot replace parts of LVP. You don't have to replace the whole thing. Yep. It's a little bit harder to do that with carpet. I guess you could do it, but it's trickier to do.
Yes. Another question. The problem is when somebody takes a box cutter and just goes across, 30 boards, 30 tiles of the planking.
Yeah. Robert says, in my market, higher priced property has really bad vacancy. The thought is that most people that can afford the rent can obtain financing. I'll kind of take this one.
Sure.
Yeah, in our market too, the higher priced stuff also has bad vacancy. It's part of that chart that I continually show from the Millionaire Real Estate Investor book, the blue book by Gary Keller. So that particular slide from there tells that, the higher priced properties do have higher vacancy. They're harder to fill. There's definitely some problems with those. This price happens to be below the median. It's actually like close to the second quartile of prices in our market. So it's not considered a high price property. It's actually considered it's probably considered entry level new construction, like the lowest cost new construction you can buy in our marketplace. So it's not very high at all.
Yeah.
And then another question from Kimberly: if the 370K house was in a 1% market, would you buy it? Is it the more expensive house or your higher appreciation assumption? And I'll kind of take this one too, although Brian can chime in as well. My philosophy on this is you really need to look at everything. You need to look at how the market is performing, how it has performed historically, and what your assumptions are for that property to make sure that they fit what you're talking about. I think one of the hidden messages, or maybe it's overt, of this class is you don't just put 10% in for maintenance on a property. it changes based on what the property is priced at, what the other assumptions of the property are. You don't just put 3% in for vacancy. You have to actually look at this stuff. You don't just put random numbers in. You really need to stop and think about the specifics of the market, the specifics of the property, and like your management philosophy and what your private property manager is doing. So there's a lot of factors to go into what you use for these numbers. And it helps if you have experience and actual data from your own portfolio of other similarly structured things, so that you can say, I'm about to buy my 8th property. These are what my first 7 did. I should use similar numbers to what I'm actually getting, because then you become a better investor. But it's really hard to do that in your first 1 or 2, which is sort of like the eye-opening part of this class, I think, for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. I think, the goal is that you think about the numbers you're putting in the spreadsheet and you go do the research to make sure they're as accurate as you can make them. And then you look at the sensitivity. You look at the rent sensitivity and the price sensitivity and like how much does that actually affect your deal? And then you make a decision and then you move forward.
Yeah, and for me, it goes beyond that. It goes into, price appreciation sensitivity and rent appreciation sensitivity and inflation sensitivity, and like your maintenance and like your interest rate sensitivity if you're going to do some refinances. But it's not just on a property level; it's really on a more portfolio level, because it's not just one property as a snapshot. It really is, how do all the pieces fit together? And I think that's part of the bigger picture that I think a lot of people miss.
Yep. Did we get all the questions? There is no actual box cutter story. It's just my personal fear of box cutters on LVP.
That's what Brian dreams of at night. He's like, oh, some tenant took a box cutter to my LVP.
Well, I think it stems from the fact that the very first property I put LVP in was like, it's a duplex and it's like 2,000 square feet on one side. And so it cost me like 13 grand to have this stuff installed, because they had to go in and like level the bottom floor because it was cement. And it was an ordeal. And I was like, oh man, if somebody comes in here and does that, I'm going to be so upset.
It looked good.
Yes, it does. It looks very good. So here's a telling set of comments from Bigger Pockets on this topic. This is really what investors miss in their search for 2% properties, because yes, exactly like Kimberly asked, hey, would you buy this if it was 1%? What if it was 2%? If you were getting $7,000 of rent on a $370,000 house, oh my gosh, that looks amazing for everybody that's in Northern Colorado who's like, oh yeah, I would buy that. Like their brain immediately goes to, oh, I would totally buy that because I'm only getting $2,200. But maybe that's not the right thing to do. So if the investment has no appreciation and will need a significant remodel, both when you buy it and when you sell it, it's pretty much a guarantee that rental income will not be enough to drive the overall return. Now, if it was really a $370,000 house and it was $7,000 a month in rent, it might actually be enough. But for the properties that we're talking about, right, $100,000 and less properties, you are going to lose. If you start putting in $10,000 or $15,000 for a remodel, you are going to be like, oh, this is negative so bad, it's not even funny. So another point. If
there's a question that's related to that, hey, why would you remodel at both purchase and sale?
So the problem is you're going to buy it, and typically you're going to need to remodel it in order for you to rent it, because it's probably an auction property, right, that you're buying at this price, or you're getting it from a turnkey company. And I'm going to cover that in a few slides. So hold that until I'm done with this slide,
okay?
Because it's coming up. So the next point from this is, if all costs are factored in and returns are compared over the entire holding period, typically your 1% property is actually, which is a quality property, is probably going to outperform this 2% property significantly.
Are these quotes from Bigger Pockets?
Yes.
Okay. The challenge I have with quotes in general from any forum, website, or anything online is that a lot of times people will make statements of fact that they claim are universally true.
Sure.
And from their reality, it may be universally true. The three properties that they bought, this is a universal truth for them. Right. And that is not always true.
Right. This isn't meant to be like, this is gold. This is meant to be, here's a telling set of what other investors have said when people are like, hey, you should go buy these $60,000 properties. This is some of the stuff that comes out that is good food for thought. So low-end properties come with higher risks than you realize. And this is someone who has done this. They're actually saying, hey, my vacancy wasn't 10%, it was 20, right? Turnover costs and cleanup was way higher than it should have been. Evictions were more common, more costly, right? One $40,000 property ended up actually costing closer to $100,000 over a decade, right? I don't buy these properties, so I have to go get my information on these properties elsewhere. But this is what an experienced investor actually experienced. So this is why, this is not a quote, this is my text, right? This is why investing is so hard, right? There are many ways to look at a property. There are many ways to convince yourself that it's worth buying, but you simply can't see these things over a 1 or 2 year hold cycle or a one tenant cycle. You could have a tenant that lives in a property for 12 years and think, man, this $60,000 property is amazing. Brian is full of it. Yeah, on that one property, you're probably going to win. And like I said, you should sell it and walk away because you've won. So you won. You got your bet on blackjack. You won. Turn around and be a winner. And just so we're clear, I am being a little facetious. There are people who buy properties like this and they make money. That's the claim, right? I've not been able to get their tax returns or see what's really going on or how are they running their properties? Are they running it like a slumlord? Because you might have to, and I don't run that way, right? It's not my cup of tea. So it's algebra time for those of you that like math. Turnkey minus n equals what?
I have no idea.
Then you don't know algebra. It's turkey. Take the n out. It's turkey. Come on.
That's not how that works, actually.
Yeah,
that's not even algebra. It's not
totally
even
how
close.
that works. Yeah. Fine. Turnkey divided by n. Yeah. So anyway, that's right.
It's actually n times the.
No, turnkey divided by n would be turkey.
Man.
Yeah. Anyway, so why are turnkey companies selling all of these great deals? Because this is really where this stems from, right? This stems from you see an ad and you're like, oh, wow, $60,000 property. I'm going to make 20% cash on cash. That's amazing. But you're typically getting these deals from a turnkey company. So why would they sell these amazing deals? Well, this is typically why. They bought for $15,000. They fixed it for $15,000. So they're 30K in and they sold it to you for 60. Awesome. They just made a really good profit and it probably took them a month to do, right? And then you get to deal with all the suffrage after that. So if it was really an amazing deal and it was really going to cash flow 20%, wouldn't they just keep them all and crush it? Like if it was really going that well, it wouldn't take long for them to build an amazing portfolio of crazy good cash flow.
Yeah, they can even borrow private money at 15% and get paid 20%, pay them off
every 5 years. You be paying houses off.
Yeah.
So you will see at some point in your investing career, here's a package deal. It's 10 or 20 properties or 50 properties or 100 properties. They're all remodeled. They're all cash flowing. They're all rented, right? Management's already in place. All you need to do is sign here on the dotted line. It's $600,000. You can just, boom, just overnight, you can have 20 properties and you can have your cash flow dreams, right? I will tell you, I've looked at these. They are super enticing, right? I'm trying to scale. I'm trying to scale faster. These look amazing. And then you dig in and they don't look so amazing. So just make sure you're running the numbers before you pull that trigger and do something. So that's the only warning I could possibly give you on those. And go visit. Go walk around the neighborhood. You can't do this remotely. You got to have some boots on the ground. Go check out the neighborhood and literally walk the streets during the day, during the night. Are you scared? And I think in one class I actually said, yeah, well, if you're scared to walk around at night, maybe you shouldn't buy it. And somebody was like, well, I live in LA and I'm scared to walk around at night. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really know what to do about that. But, I think you get the point of what I'm making. So, if you are going to buy them, yeah. Who doesn't need some Mr. T in their life right about now?
That is pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah. But seriously, if you are going to buy them, make sure that all of the systems are in good order. Like build this into your purchasing numbers, right? Start locally if possible. Like got to know where you're buying. There are neighborhoods in Fort Collins where You would see a $60,000 house and be like, oh, it's in Fort Collins. Yeah, I totally want to buy that. That's crazy low. And then you find out that, oh, I made a bad decision because I didn't walk the neighborhood. I didn't know what it was, right? Manage and do the maintenance yourself. You have to squeeze this profit. That's the way you're going to make money, right? Don't buy in the bad areas. Like I said, drive it, walk it, talk to people, understand the demographics of your neighborhood. Like, go figure out, is this something I want to buy? Buy slightly nicer than the average house, and use this to help you find a better, longer-term tenant who's going to stick around.
Hey, out of an abundance of clarity, I don't recommend you buy nicer than the average priced house. I think if you got your price point selected, you selected your neighborhood of properties that are priced right, where they have good rent to price ratios, then you're buying not the crappiest property in the neighborhood. You're buying the slightly nicer properties in that neighborhood, but not above average, in my opinion. Brian may be saying something else.
Yeah, I'm not saying price. I'm saying when you go to the neighborhood, try and find the house that's like slightly nicer than the rest at the same price.
Yeah.
Right?
Better value.
Yeah, better value, and it will attract a hopefully better tenant. Like, if they're choosing the difference between, hey, I can live where I'm at in this nice house that you have, or I can go somewhere else for the same rent and it's not as nice, they're probably going to stay. So part of this is trying to entice your tenants to actually stay longer, because every time you have turnover, it's going to kill your profit.
In the real estate brokerage world, we call these cream puff properties, where somebody shopping in a certain price range will come across a property that is just way nicer, better maintained, just a better overall quality, better value buy, for the same price that they've been looking at. If they're shopping for $300,000 properties and they come across one that's just so much better, like this one's amazing for $300K. That's what we're talking about. The cream puffs that are really nice for the same price.
Yep. I got 4 minutes left. So here we go. Still, CapEx and maintenance are ROI killers. They're typically older houses, right? Make sure you've run your numbers, visit often, and make sure your tenant knows it's not a bad idea to call you. If you have a slow leak, that's going to cost you a lot of money if your tenant doesn't call. So don't forget to consider these potential concerns. Super cheap properties often are older housing stock. Old properties typically require more ongoing maintenance. We've proven this in the arguably the best class part 5, where I talked about, hey, older properties, they cost more, right? That's going to kill your future cash flow. They're typically harder to lease, right? The difference in caliber of tenants from low end rentals to higher rent range, in some areas of the country, I don't know that there's a lot of difference. In other areas, there's probably a significant difference. I've seen both sides of that coin. So if you do have a lower caliber tenant, you're probably going to be doing more evictions and you're probably going to have more turnover, which is going to suck and kill your profit. There's also a correlation between lower priced properties and crime. Go look up what your crime rates are, right? Are you buying a property that you think is a class B property, but really it's class D? Go check it out. Future resale of your property. So many of these properties are located in neighborhoods that are all rentals. Who buys rentals when you put them up for sale? Investors. So guess what? You're an investor. You want a good deal coming in, but when you go to sell it, who's going to buy it? Probably an investor. What are they going to want? A good deal from you. It's really a kind of, double-edged sword. So at least not to a retail buyer, and you're probably not in line with the appreciation rate in the market. If you already own them, I probably have some silly animation coming. Run the numbers again and check it out for yourself. Don't just be like, well, I already own it, whatever, I'm going to move forward. We had an interview with somebody who actually bought 5 of these properties in Indy and has since been working to get rid of those properties, right? Because they're not making the money and they're not doing as well as he would have hoped they would have done.
You mean he can't instantly get out of them?
No. So don't rely on the fact that, hey, Brian, whatever, shut up, dude. Like, I've made $200 every month. I've had no turnover. I have no expenses, right? Maybe 1 or 2, but I'm making a killing on these things. And you're only 2 years in. Like, welcome to long-term investing. It's not going to continue. Stuff's going to need to be replaced. Look at the comps in the neighborhood and go back as far as you can and see what is the appreciation in the neighborhood, right? Or simply sell them. So, lease option, owner finance them to save on your sale costs. And that's exactly what this person I was talking about did. And, he owner financed one of them, I think, and sold a couple of them. But, he just looked at it and went, yeah, this is just not nearly as lucrative as other things I could have this money placed in. If you do owner finance, please be careful of Dodd-Frank rules. I'm not covering that tonight. Go look it up. Long-term portfolio, another discussion point for why would you buy these houses, right? And this is a class all by itself. So I'm not going to teach this full class, but do you really want older or newer homes in your portfolio? Do you want $60,000 houses that are typically going to be older, $30,000 houses? Do you want good neighborhoods or do you want mediocre or bad neighborhoods? Like, where do you want to invest, right? Do you want to own 300 houses to get to your goal, or do you want to own 30 houses to get to your goal? Because if you're making, a purchase that's a $60,000 house and it turns out you're making, $50 a month, it's going to take you a lot of houses to get to $5K a month in cash flow. Do you really want to have that 100 property thing just to get to the $5K in cash flow? It's going to be rough. It's a lot of overhead, a lot of management that's going on. So I just want to share with you some things that people that claim to be really amazing investors say to argue that little deals like this are still amazing, regardless of what ignoring everything I said tonight. The obvious one that's been discussed already, I can get a roof, a water heater for cheaper than all the crap that you're telling me. Absolutely, we've discussed it, so I'm not going to really dive. The $30,000 homes, is a quote again, may help people get into real estate investing. That's what I have to say about that. Like, does that make any sense? Like, hey, you can get in, but it's going to be a really rough ride. It's just not going to go your way. And then you're going to be like, I shouldn't have bought this. I need to sell it. And you're going to be turned off by real estate investing. Like, I would never tell someone to go buy something that's going to be this difficult. That doesn't make any sense to me.
But it's cheap. It's easy to get in with the amount of money.
Sure. I mean, you could just burn your money instead. I mean, it might actually be better. Less headache. So experienced investors may be right, usually, right? However, I think those cheaper properties can serve as a great educational tool for future investing. Yeah, you're going to learn a lot of crappy lessons, right? If the property cash flows, it may be worth the struggle for a newer investor so they can get their feet wet. Again, why would you put yourself through something that doesn't have to be that hard? It just doesn't make sense. And then James's favorite quote of all times, I just believe in little deals. When someone starts a sentence about real estate investing with, I just believe, probably should ignore what they're about to say. You can't fall very far with a little deal. The floor is very close. I don't know about you, but if you fall 10 feet onto a floor versus 20 feet, it still hurts. So I think this is just dumb. And then this person goes on to say, a vacant month is no big deal with a little deal, which is completely not the right attitude nor the right business sense to be applying to real estate. And so I just want to point out that is wrong. So here's a bunch of articles that everyone should read. And I will take these and paste them into the comments after the next slide. But I don't even really care if you read the articles, because some of the articles are just, they're written almost as clickbait, like, hey, you shouldn't buy this, or why you should never do this. It's really the comment section on these articles that's really kind of eye-opening and gives you a little bit of, hey, this is how different people are thinking about this, and stuff can devolve very quickly in some of these comment sections. But I'd encourage you to go read these, even though some of these are older. They will at least give you a picture of, hey, there's some really interesting stuff to think about here. And finally, my summary, buy and hold perspective. That's what we focused on again tonight. We were not flipping. You too can go be the turnkey company if you want to. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to go buy a house for $15K, put 10 or $15K into it and sell it to somebody for $60K, go do that. It's just flipping. It's a really great way to make a profit. Or you can just buy long-term rentals and make the same amount of profit. The 50% rule doesn't work well at this price point. We discussed this. We're over that on the properties that we looked at, in the 60% range. It's just not CapEx, maintenance, all that stuff. It's not linear to the rental income. It's the same cost for a water heater in a $100,000 house as it is for a $250,000 house. Calculate your CapEx, add it in for a better long-term view. 2% rent to price ratio doesn't mean it's a good deal. CapEx costs typically start to be covered around $900 a month for single family home and $625 a month for multifamily. So you can look for that. But that doesn't mean just go buy those low price rentals because they have that rent. You still have to do the analysis just like we've done here tonight. You still have to go think about the property you're going to buy and make sure it's a fit for you and make sure it's going to be profitable, right? One of the sayings in real estate is buy right. If you buy wrong, it's really hard. You have to wait a long time sometimes for that to get forgiven. And real estate's pretty forgiving, but sometimes it takes a lot of time. Do your analysis. We just talked about that. It doesn't have to cost $30,000. It doesn't have to cost $60,000. It doesn't have to cost $100,000 to have these issues, right? Go do your due diligence. And as always, if you look at something and you're like, this is too good to be true, it probably is. Don't be fooled.
Hey, so I realize that's your summary, but go back for a second on the last bullet point there. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Is it, real estate investing where you're getting, I'm just going to throw a number out there, 20% return per year on your money? Isn't that a too good to be true number?
I mean, it would seem that way on the surface, but when you go and you dig in and you do the research and you plug everything in and you look at your sensitivity and you're still in that range, then no. I mean, There is a reason that the majority of wealth in our country has been generated by owning real estate.
Yeah.
So, and part of that comes from you have a piece of real estate, and if you leverage that and you're beating inflation alone, that makes it a great deal. So, if you're buying properties for cash, it's not going to probably look as fast of a wealth building exercise. But if you're leveraging everything, I mean, the people that are doing Nomad and, 10 years from now, we're going to come back and talk to them and interview them. And it's going to be like, I mean, we're already in the explicit. It'll be like literally, holy shit, you have done an amazing job simply by moving 8 to 10 times. And it's going to be nuts.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be 8 to 10, but yes, right. I mean, I think that's true.
I mean, yeah, I talked to my kids now about it. I'm like, hey, I know you're 13, but we're getting you primed here that, if you do this like 3 or 4 times when you're right out of college, like you're just going to have such a head start on your retirement. It's going to be insane. So that's my summary. That's what I got. We will take questions. I'm going to click in here and go back and paste those links so that everybody can simply click on them easier or copy them.
Yeah. Barbie and Bob say, really great class as always. Thank you, James and Brian. Yeah, thank you, Brian. We really do appreciate you doing that. Sure. I'm going to add, one other additional comment to this, and this is sort of like the perspective. We've been teaching classes, at least I've been teaching classes since 2003. And so it's 17 years now that we've been teaching classes. And I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things of at least teaching classes and being involved in real estate investing. My parents were involved in real estate investing forever, but I will tell you what you really gain an understanding of, and we talk about this a lot, is the idea that if you go to a class on deal analysis or on buying, cheap rentals or on, managing properties or something like that, and you walk away thinking, okay, I've done the deal analysis class or I've done the property management class, and you think that you are competent after taking a single class, that is a huge mistake. Because I will tell you, like, the more I dig into even the smallest parts of all this stuff, like, a single bullet point on one of Brian's slides tonight, there's so much nuance and detail that once you really start to understand real estate investing, you realize, hey, I thought I knew what this meant, but I have no idea. And like, I am consciously aware now that I am woefully unprepared to deal with even the smallest subsection of what's going on. So I know there's no way I know everything about what's going on. And if you think I know everything about blah, 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 or something else, or anything else Brian talked about, you're a fool. And I'll say it like straight up, because there's no way you know everything. And Brian and I, at least I know I do, I'm constantly reading books and studying courses and investing myself and creating software and looking at numbers and analyzing deals and all this stuff, and actively involved in this every single day. And the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know crap about what's going on. I mean, I know a lot, but I still don't know everything. And there's no way I could ever learn everything. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is why we encourage people to like come to the same class more than once, because it's like reading Millionaire Real Estate Investor at the beginning of your real estate investing career, after you've bought 3 houses, after you've bought 10 houses, and then when you start buying something different, and then when you decide to like start paying them off, like you glean different things based on where you're at in your career of real estate investing. And so when you think about what you need when you are looking to buy your first house, it's like your concerns are, well, is it going to rent for what I think it's going to rent for? And is this the right house for me to buy? Like those are your top 2 concerns in many cases. You're not thinking about, well, how am I going to attract quality tenants, or how am I going to do tenant screening? You haven't bought the house yet. As soon as you buy the house, you're like, oh my gosh, how do I get the work done that's needed to be done? And it's literally like an on demand, like, okay, I need this information now. And so in order for you to glean what you need and get a much deeper understanding and a deeper knowledge base, you have to like do that same class again when you're in a different spot in your investing career.
And not even just the same class, but here conflicting
Yeah.
views, right? Like
Yes.
like sometimes I love digging into something where someone's like, you know what the best strategy is? The best strategy is Burr, or buying mobile home parks, or flipping notes, or whatever it is, because then I gain like a whole different understanding of why they think that's great. And I like to look at it and say, here are the flaws with my model, and here are the problems we talk about all the time about, this is annoying, or this is the potential danger, or here's the biggest risk factor. But there are similar things in every single model. There is no 100% perfect model. Everyone has its like strengths and weaknesses, and going in there and evaluating those and understanding those, the more you're exposed to and the more you study and the more detail you get, the better you are. And so I agree with you. Just study whatever you need and keep studying and digging.
Yeah. And, my goal tonight, like part of it is to add some humor to the class, right? Because otherwise, if we just talk about CapEx, it's really boring.
It is really
but, part of it is, I'm not saying there aren't people out there making money by buying what they would say, oh, I bought this $60,000 or $50,000 house. And as a point this afternoon, when I met with the person that I talked about having interviewed, he actually has his last property that he's trying to get rid of under contract now. And I was like, well, okay, well, what did you buy it? And we kind of walked through it, and he paid $60K for it, and it's under contract for roughly 90. And I was like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't sound like what I would have expected. Like what you did with the other 4, it was kind of like you bought at 60 and kind of sold at 60, right? And there's a span of years in between. And I'm like, why is it selling for so much more? And he basically said, well, it's a bigger house, it has multiple bathrooms, and it's in a nicer neighborhood. And I was like, oh, so it doesn't fit the model of what we were talking about tonight, right? It fits a totally different model where there actually is appreciation and people are possibly moving into that neighborhood. So I was like, well, I'm going to use this example tonight because this is really pertinent. So there are definitely times where I think people will be confused about, well, I bought the $60,000 rental and I made a lot of money. Yeah, if it's worth $90,000 now, you probably did make a lot of money. But if it's not, and it's worth $46,000 10 years later, you probably are pretty unhappy. So you need to know the difference. And that's the goal of the class.
There's another interesting thing here. And this is why I find this fascinating, and why I think you need to go and sit in your hot tub for 2 hours and just deconstruct some of this stuff. Because when I heard that story from Brian, what I immediately went to is, okay, so 4 of the properties you were break even with. One of them you did, I don't know, pretty well, 50% increase in the price that you sold it for. And so when you look at that over like an EV sort of like look at it, you start thinking to yourself, okay, so on 4 of them, I got my money back, not bad. And on one of them, I actually got a 50%-ish return on just price appreciation. I probably had some cash flow and stuff over that time. And so when you look at the overall thing, maybe, I don't know, I need to like sit back and unpack this, but maybe when I go and I sit in the hot tub and think about this for 2 hours, I come to the conclusion that's not a great thing, but it's another way to look at it and stuff to be learned and taken away from that. I don't know. That's just the thought.
Yeah, and my guess is that this person probably could go back and look at that and go, hey, how can I go pick this one out of the multitude of properties? And could I find those? And would it be worth it to do a bunch of those enough?
Yeah. However, iterate and get better.
Yes. However, I think the answer there would still be no, based on what I know. And part of this is this particular property, for however long this person owned it, only had one actual tenant. So remember the blackjack in Vegas thing?
Yeah.
This is I got lucky. I had one tenant It was a bigger house. I got lucky because it was in a slightly better neighborhood. So am I going to just turn around and take that as a win and walk away? Yes. Am I going back? No.
We should do a class on high probability real estate investing strategies where we look at like, what are you most likely to be successful with, just based on as much data as we can possibly get to make some educated decisions about stuff. And just like you taught in some of your EV classes about making decisions, you're never going to have 100% always correct, never make a mistake. You have made mistakes, I'm sure. I know I've made a ton of mistakes. I mean, like 7-figure type mistakes. So I could tell you that you never are perfect in these sort of things. You are constantly learning things. You're constantly finding out what went well, what went wrong, and evaluating, especially when it's painful emotionally and financially, for you to say, okay, what lessons did I take from this? And sometimes it's harder when you do things well because you don't step back and say, what was luck and what was actually the skill part of that positive decision. You don't want to say to yourself, oh, this really went well for me. I can't make any mistakes now. My strategy is perfect. And I think that would be a huge error in judgment moving forward in doing that. So,
yeah.
All right, cool. I don't have anything else. People were all saying thank you for the podcast, Brian. Thanks. We really do appreciate coming on and doing that. Do you want to answer any final questions from anybody? I'd almost rather get some of this stuff on recording rather than go into a chat thing. Because sometimes when we stop the recording, people ask questions that we're like, we should have recorded this.
Well,
so
let's stop it and then record it. That way
you want to record it separately, or if we just record it here? Any final questions?
Separately, but up to you. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, let's keep it going. And if anyone has questions. So Michael says, I like the idea, high probability real estate class. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. And, some of the tools we have make this, I think at least, much better than just anyone else doing a class on high probability real estate investing, because some of the things we could do, like Monte Carlo simulations of varying market conditions and variations on the strategy and be able to make changes based on certain things that happen. I don't think everyone can do that level of analysis. The Real Estate Financial Planner software allows us to do some things. So I think we are uniquely qualified maybe to teach a class, at least from that perspective. We may not be uniquely qualified in being able to really evaluate all the variables coming in and stuff like that, but I don't know anyone that is particularly qualified to do that. Maybe there are. So
do you want me to pop people onto video, or you want to
Sure. I don't care.
Okay. You don't want me to stop the recording though?
This will be the crazy class where we left the video run for afterward, and I'll just keep talking and saying some crazy stuff. So what Brian's going to do, he's going to start popping people on video. You guys are welcome to leave. The class is officially over. We will keep it open for any questions. And yeah, Robert says he's hideous to look at. So if you guys want to ask questions, Brian will do this. Go ahead and keep yourself muted unless you have something you want to add. We are recording, and this will get published. And so we're happy to do that. And I don't plan on sticking around for very long because ice cream is calling.
Yeah. Dinner is probably almost here for me.
Yeah. Brian, I don't know about you, but I got COVID 20. That's the 20 pounds I gained since COVID began. So there's that going on.
Man.
Jason says he's going to go put on pants. Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh. I hate that it jumped so much.
Yeah.
I'm almost done.
All right, cool. So if there aren't any questions, we will end the recording. I'm going to keep going. And for those that are listening on the podcast, if you want to skip to the next episode, because I don't know if there's going to be any questions or not, you're welcome to do so. I will try to keep it a little bit more PG than we sometimes get when we go to class after the class, but
it's already an explicit class, so
it is already
whatever you want.
Well, that's not true. Yeah. Well, cool. So thanks again for teaching, Brian. Really do appreciate that. If no one has questions, you may have just done an exercise in futility by making everyone live on their video. We may end up ending this whole thing and stopping the recording. So
Jason says, this is the one class I could swear on. No, there's several that I've taught.
Yeah, that gets listed as explicit in the podcast thing. I'm not sure really what that does, or if it really prevents me from getting complaints or something, but I don't know.
My guess is it probably prevents kids from listening to it if they're not over 13.
Okay, good. Yeah.
But you know what? if there's some kids trying to listen to this podcast and they're 13, they should be able to listen to this.
They should be able to hear the swear words.
That's right.
They're mature
They
enough
are.
to do the math. They can listen to the swear words. That's pretty funny. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a parental control toggle. Okay, that's good to know. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I can't quite find the right temperature for my house. Like, I'm still in that weird thing. Like, I don't know, yesterday, the day before, it was cold. Now I'm like sweating. I opened my door up to get some air in here. It got like stuffy during the class. I don't know.
Yes. So imagine if instead of your thermostat using Fahrenheit, it used Celsius.
Is that what yours does?
No, but just, I mean, because it's like a whatever, 2 point some odd degree for every Celsius degree, right? So like instead of having the like control of like 70 degrees to 71, you'd be like 70 to 73.
Oh, the Celsius ones don't do like half degrees or something.
I'm sure
like
they do, but
okay.
I always think that would be funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Robert says ceiling fans. I say, yes, that's what I got up to turn mine on.
Yeah. I should probably put a ceiling fan in. I'm trying to decide if I'm moving into the basement. I was going to finish the basement with my office down there. I just may take over the whole basement and not finish it. I don't know. Well, we're trying to decide what we're going to do. To be determined.
I think maybe because we're like, you know, on recording still, people are like, I'm not saying anything.
I think that's what's going on. It's the fear of being like documented and recorded for what's going on. You'll notice Nick's not saying anything. He's like, I'm not coming on at all. I'm not even acknowledging I'm here.
I stay in my lane. I know my place.
Finally someone breaks the third barrier where they're talking to the audience or something like that. Yeah. So that's good. And
the fourth wall.
The fourth wall, that's what it is. Yeah. Oh, Jason says that most Celsius thermostats do have a 10th or half or 10th degrees.
I would think honestly, it'd be a 10th. Yeah. 10th might be better.
That's what I was just going to say. Now you have more control. That's even more amazing.
So Chris actually asked a question for us.
Oh, okay.
Do you still use 10% maintenance for condos? Trying to fill out the spreadsheet for my property. So there is no easy answer to this question. So it depends on what your HOA actually covers. It depends on what the condition of your condo is currently in. It depends on how you manage your properties. But, you know, if you were like, hey, can you just give me a number? I mean, 10% would be, you know, probably reasonable. It's probably honestly, depending on what the rent is, like if you want to type what your rent is or something and let us know kind of like rent to price ratio so that we have a little bit more information, like 10% might be a little high if the HOA is covering like roof and stuff like that. So, you know, you're in the ballpark. I mean, a single family home is usually 8 to 12 for kind of what we looked at. And then you include some CapEx in that, maybe it's 10 to, 14. So I mean, you're definitely not out of the ballpark.
For like $1,800 a month rent, approximately.
Yeah.
That's what those numbers are based on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey Brian, since you ripped apart this whole 1% thing, what you didn't show is what the numbers would need to look like on that $60,000 house for it to be a deal for you under your criteria. Can you comment on that in any way?
That's interesting. How much rent would you need to get in order to have it be
worthwhile? To make it work?
Well, I think you just run the numbers and you look at your rent sensitivity and you go, at what point am I confident in my rent and my appreciation in order to make this actually work, right? And honestly, for me, the problem is that my personal criteria are I'm not going to buy out of town unless I'm going somewhere and I'm going to buy like 10 properties in that same town because going and doing the one-off is just silly to me. I'm not going to do that.
There's a couple little things like that we didn't really go into, and that is like, the economies of scale and the oversight and management of having to start a new relationship with a new property manager and train them how you like to be treated. And you don't quite have the leverage you do when you have a much larger portfolio of properties all with one, and you have some sway over maybe changing policies or giving them feedback and having some credibility. So there's all those little like they're like non-balance sheet sort of like attributes. Is that a fair thing to say, Brian?
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, I mean, I did show on the very last slide, like about $900 a month for a single family home is where the crossover starts to happen, where you don't have the CapEx problem. So really I would hope it to be, somewhere in that range, or multifamily, it's like 650 or something like that. And that's just a ballpark guess. It's not like go buy every property that has $900 or more rent. It's just that is typically where you're going to start to see some crossover.
And these numbers will vary over time. And I'll tell you, one of the things we're not taking into account now is that since COVID, with our supply chain issues, we're seeing a dramatic increase in the cost of building materials, including lumber and unavailability of things, which, I mean, they could actually take all of our maintenance numbers and increase them by a factor two, for all I know. So like lumber, I think is more than doubled in price, and builders are even telling me that the cost of new construction is definitely going up because the cost of materials has gone up. And I'm trying to figure out how they're justifying raising prices on stuff they've already built and already paid for. But I think that they are going to do that too. So,
yeah. So Chris says I bought for $225K in Westminster. Rent's probably $1,500 to $1,650. Built in 73, original boiler, newer, everything else. So, I mean, you know, if everything else is newer, I would just figure out, you know, what is your boiler replacement going to cost? And I would definitely build that in, because if it's a boiler just for the one unit, which I have a fourplex that has a boiler in every unit, which is literally the dumbest thing ever. And they built them behind the freaking water heaters. So in order for them to do anything, they actually have to take the water heater out. It's so bad. It's silly. So, you know, build your cost for your boiler in and look at the other stuff and just run a quick analysis. And I would say, you know, you're probably on target with 10%, but I would make sure you have enough to replace that boiler because it's probably coming due soon.
Yeah, and I'd say the better way to answer this question, it's a kind of plus one what Brian said, is use his capital expense section on his spreadsheet and actually see what you're responsible for, how frequently you probably are going to need to do that, what it would probably cost to do that particular repair, and then see what the overall capital expense number looks like, and then figure out what that is as a percentage of your current rent and use that as your percentage as just a more accurate way to really estimate that number.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I have nothing else to add. Thank you all for coming. Really do appreciate it. Brian, you really did a good job. We're super fortunate that you're willing to teach these classes for free, by the way. We really do appreciate it. And so thank you for doing that.
Sure.
And thank you for coming on. And yeah, I don't know. I find it pretty amusing to do these classes with you.
Wouldn't it be great if someone made an Excel spreadsheet that helped calculate CapEx cost?
There is an Excel spreadsheet for it. It's
Yeah,
already in your spreadsheet.
I think he's just being funny.
Hey, Chris, it's awesome. Thanks. Not looking like a great deal. If you're talking about the property you bought, I would strongly disagree with you.
Yeah, based on the numbers you posted.
I don't think that's bad at all. I mean, I have not ran your numbers, but I will tell you 3% down on a property that you're going to eventually convert to a rental. Nomad, anybody? I mean, the numbers for that look pretty insanely good. So I would not be disappointed with that at all. But I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, I'd be curious why you thought it was why you think it's a bad deal. I mean,
Yeah.
3% down may be the thing that's actually hurting you. And if you have a portfolio loan because you couldn't get a normal Fannie because the HOA wasn't well funded, or more than 50% were rentals or something like that, then, you know, it might be the loan that's actually feels like it's weighing you down. But I don't think your expenses and your rent to price ratio there. I mean, I bought a condo here, and I mean, people paid $225 for them, and they're renting for about the same thing. And the problem is the HOA fees, right? It's HOA fee for you, and maybe that's a bad thing, but you know, my HOA fee is like keeps going up and up and up and up and up. So
yeah, the HOA, when you're analyzing deals for condos, the HOA needs to be, you need to find out what it includes, and then you could usually adjust down your insurance from what you're typically paying for single family homes. So you tend to take some of the money, at least mentally, and say, okay, part of this HOA, because the HOA company is usually insuring the exterior of the property, then you can say, I can pay less in insurance to do that. And then the other thing is that maintenance number. Your maintenance is probably going to be a little bit lower. So not all of the HOA fee really is a 100% hit to the bottom line. It's usually offset by a little bit. Not
the problem is, like in his case, his HOA is $275. My guess is he's paying about $750 in like a year for insurance, and like normal insurance would be like maybe $1,200 if it was a single family home. And so it's like, 2 months, and you got the other 10 months, which is $2,700. So that kills cash flow fast.
But part of it too is that maintenance. Let's say his maintenance is 10%, like we were just saying, and now you're not paying 13 or whatever it is on a single family home. So that starts adding up too. So it's not like a 1-to-1, definitely, but you're also not having to deal with exterior maintenance if the property's ever vacant, or so there's some additional benefits of doing those.
There's also a less headache, right? Like for some people, they're like, I'm only going to buy condos. I'm going to manage them myself. All I really need to do is leasing. I don't need to worry about snow removal or yard care or, extra amenities. I just need to make sure the inside of my unit looks good, and I need to rent it.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree. Yeah. The 3%.
James, James, I've been making some jokes in the chat about Nomad being awesome.
It is awesome.
And it is. What comments might you have in relation to what Brian talked about for the past 2 hours and 28 minutes in relation to CapEx on properties that are appropriate for Nomad?
Are you saying like, should people nomad into $60,000 properties? Is that what you're asking me?
No. Well, no, I'm asking you what your thoughts might be doing Nomad on properties that have CapEx expenses versus the new construction properties that a lot of your clients buy.
I tend to like properties that are in better condition for nomads, partially because the cash flow when you put a smaller amount down is usually worse in the beginning. And I'd rather you have some maintenance deferment, like delayed maintenance costs on your property, by having newer properties that have less need for cash up front. And so I would prefer for nomads in general to be able to have newer properties that need less maintenance, and then you have lower capital expenses and lower maintenance costs up front. And then when cash flow improves, then you can sort of fund that more out of your, kind of like cash flow. Although, because a lot of nomads, when they buy the property with 3% down or 5% down or whatever it is, they're going to be slightly negative, slightly positive often with the cash flow from depreciation, but slightly negative from a pure cash flow perspective. So that's what we typically see. I don't know if that helps. I thought you were going to ask me if I thought nomads should buy $60,000 properties, and I will tell you my general feeling on that is probably not. I think that you should stretch and go a little bit higher in price because you are using loan spots. You're moving into these properties and living there. I'd rather see you in a slightly nicer property, because at the end of the day, if you really are doing a very plain vanilla traditional nomad, you're going to be owning those properties 30 years from now, and they'll be paid off, and you want to buy quality in quality areas that you'll want to have in your portfolio 30 years from now. And the more expensive properties you are, that's the amount of money in today's dollars that will be paid off. So if you think about buying, $60,000 properties, and they, over the next 40 years, they actually get paid off and have appreciated in today's dollars, they would be worth about $600,000 when you adjust back to inflation to today. If you buy $90,000 properties, now you have $900,000 worth of properties that you bought in that marketplace. And so the difference is you have a $600,000 nest egg versus almost $1 million nest egg. And I'd rather have the million.
Yeah, I think one of those things too, to me, that it's exactly what you said, but I think about it in slightly different way, which is one of the mistakes I feel like I made early on was I took a loan from a bank for like $80,000 to buy a house. And I always look back at that and I go, it would have been much smarter to have had a $200,000 loan instead of a $80,000 loan. Or if I would have been able to get a $300,000 loan and properties were higher priced, it would have been better for me to have 10 $300,000 loans and have tenants pay off $3 million of mortgage debt for me than to have them pay off $800,000.
Yeah.
So you have to use your loan spots wisely, especially if you're doing nomad. Yeah, you can keep going, but if you're only going to 5 or 6 and you bought 5 or 6 of the $60,000 properties, I think you'd be way happier if you bought 5 $300,000 properties.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do agree. I think we just said the same thing. You took the loan spot approach to get to the same result, and I took the net worth approach to get to the same end spot, when really it's the same thing, right? Like ultimately it's that larger loan spot, because at the end of the day the tenant has paid that all off, and now you have that value that you've created there for doing it. And so I totally agree with that. I
was just pointing out, it's like that's one of the mistakes I feel like I've made.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's how I got to what you said.
Yeah, and you know what else is interesting? If you are not going to 10, it doesn't really matter as much, right? But you don't often know that you're not going to 10 in the beginning. You might think I'm only going to 3 or 4 or 5, and the next thing you know, you get married or get a divorce, and you're like, I now I'm going all the way to 10 because I have a different resource level or a different thought process. Things have changed for me. I've got 14 kids instead of the 2 kids I have, or I have a kid that has special needs and they're never going to go away, and so I need to have a lot more money in retirement than I thought I was going to have, or I come down with a medical condition and now I need a lot more money to support me. And so things change, and you might think I'm only doing Nomad 3 times, and eventually you say I need 12 properties now in order to hit my number. And if you don't plan for that early enough, you could regret those first 3 because you've already moved out and you're probably not refinancing out of those owner occupant loans in a lot of cases, especially once you get over 10, because it gets much harder to navigate those with cash out refinance, especially doing those things. So there's a lot of considerations to take into account when you're
and even without a life change, I think what happens is you go, oh, I was at 5. I thought I was going to stop, but I'm actually going to go to 10. And then you get to 10 and you're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go to 20. So, had you done the first 5 in a different way, maybe you would only go to 10 instead of 20. It's just all sorts of stuff.
And the way I think about that, Jason, I'll catch you in a second. I also see your question, Carlos. We'll get to you. The way that I think about that, though, Brian, is I start thinking to myself, there's the distribution curve of people that are going to buy 30 properties versus the distribution curve of the people that are going to do 2, right? I think there is a much greater frequency, a much higher number in raw numbers of people and percentage of people that are going to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And I think there's the exceptions. There's like the 6 Sigma events that are 3 or even 3 Sigma events, the guys that are going to be exceptional and buy 20 properties. And I don't know. You could try to plan for that, but I think that's the exception rather than the rule in some cases.
Well, don't even use 5, 10, and 20 then. Use 2, 5, and 8, right? I mean, replace my numbers with lower numbers, and I still think it matters.
I do too, although to a lesser degree, right? Because for some reason that 10, because of the current loan limits and the ability to get 30-year fixed rate financing, although with Nomad that goes away, but the like buying non-owner occupant loans and the finance you can get with those for single family homes, duplex, triplex, and fourplexes, it does have a weird limit at 10 that makes it more challenging to do stuff. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just makes it a little bit trickier and harder to do. So
does that conversation about nomading in relation to the CapEx cost, does it change your opinion or perspective at all? If somebody is willing to nomad into 2 to 4 unit properties, they've got FHA or VA eligibility for their first, few properties, and they can do a 2 to 4 unit. Does that change your perspective?
Do you mean does the duplex, triplex, or fourplex trump that it's going to have a higher CapEx or maintenance number?
Yeah.
I think it might to a certain degree, but you have to do the math and see where that crossover happens, because there may be, if you look at doing a single family home that doesn't have those higher CapEx numbers versus buying the duplex, triplex, or fourplex, where you do have these higher maintenance numbers, I think you're going to be making a trade-off in some ways between net worth and cash flow in some of those cases. And so you have to make a balanced decision over what's most important to you. And I think most people would actually lean toward the cash flow number. But it's deceptive because the cash flow number may actually be worse in the short term with higher capital expense on the duplex, triplex, or fourplex. But once you get that worked out and your rents have actually increased, it may actually be better. And so it's a tricky thing to time that, and it's a tricky thing to model because you need to make a lot of assumptions about what's happening in the future, and that is hard to predict. So I don't know, that's how I would look at it. It'd be a case by case, but at the end of the day, I think it would really come down to some subjectivity about what you believe and what you're ultimately looking for in that particular situation. So the short answer is, if you really feel strongly about having done duplex, triplex, or fourplexes, that's probably going to be the correct decision for you, even if the math is slightly in the favor of the single family home in this case. I will tell you, timing wise, if you're in a market where it's hard to buy the duplex, triplex, or fourplex, and you only find a good deal flow at single family homes, it is much better almost universally to actually do the single family home than to wait even for an amazing duplex, triplex, or fourplex. Because if you can acquire 2 single family homes in the same time it took you to find even an amazing duplex, triplex, or fourplex, I still think that's more advantageous. But I don't know. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's math supports me. Carlos's question: for expensive markets, how high will be the home price is recommended with Nomad? It's not a home price, not a raw home price specifically. I think for most nomads, they're going to be below the median price. So if your median price is 600,000, then you're going to be below 600,000. You tend not to be at the very, very low end of the market, so you're not going to be at the cheapest stuff, but you are not going to be above median in most cases. So we tend to look at like median and below, like the second quartile, if you're thinking about where prices end up being. But another metric, and I haven't proven this out in like a whole bunch of markets, but another metric I would use is maybe not in the main city where you are, but definitely within a certain driving distance around, look for what the least expensive, brand new entry level starter house that you can buy is. And that's probably a good number to at least be comparing for buying stuff. So if you go look around, your median price is 600,000 and you are able to find, a new construction property that's at that 495 sort of range, then I think you look at 495-ish properties. And there's so much to go on here, right? Like if you can't qualify for a 495 loan, that's problematic. If the rent on those properties is going to be really, really hard for you to support, that's also potentially problematic. And so I think there's a lot more that goes into the discussion, but purely on a price basis, that's the 2 measures that I would look at. I'd look at median. I would kind of look at that second quartile of where the 25th percentile is. And then I would also look at the least expensive new construction you could find. And even more specifically, the least expensive 4-bedroom new construction property that you can find. I think there's something magical about that 3rd to 4th bedroom kind of like price to rent ratio that we often see in properties. And so that's kind of my criteria. I wouldn't say condo new construction. I would do single family home, standalone 4-bedroom properties that are on their own lot. But that's sort of what I would look at as kind of like a range for prices. So I don't know if that helps you at all. Robert, yes. And what other criteria do you use? So I did a whole 2-hour class on buying criteria. I believe it's on the podcast. I also believe it's on the website. And so I think it's called Buying Criteria Workshop or something crazy like that. And in that class for 2 hours, I went over that. I'm not sure I want to recover it right now, but there's a ton of stuff in there. And Carlos says, thank you a lot. Yes, it does. So I ran some scenarios yesterday on Hackensack, New Jersey. And Hackensack, New Jersey, one of the interesting things about Hackensack is the tax rate in New Jersey is ridiculously high. We're looking at, I think, $360,000 properties where the taxes were like $8,000 a year. And so, a $370,000 property out here might have taxes of, I don't know, $2,500 a year. And so it's 3 times the tax rate, which makes cash flow look really ugly. I mean, like ridiculously ugly. Try to make a property and rents were similar. I think rents were like in the $2,200 to $2,400 a month range for this 370-ish property. And taxes were like, whatever it was, $5,000 more, $400 per month more than what we're seeing out here. And that makes those numbers much harder to work. And I ran some scenarios comparing doing Nomad and doing 20% down properties and stuff like that. And I think we need to do some more interesting things. I probably should do some separate classes on this. So I'm not ready to talk about it because I haven't really thought all my thoughts through and my thinking process on some of this stuff. But there's definitely some things we may need to tweak a little bit when you're in markets with extreme rent to price ratios or having extreme expense like taxes as an example on those properties. So, and it may apply similarly to maintenance because a really high maintenance number looks a lot like on the bottom line to really high taxes, right? If you have a similar really high expense, then it definitely impacts your bottom line cash flow, which looks really similar to the taxes being high.
And then Asa says, what about markets with unrelated occupancy limits like U+2? Does 4 bedrooms still add value? So I definitely think so. I mean, we've seen it in our market, Fort Collins. I mean, Windsor has a slightly different occupancy requirement, but the difference to 3 to 4 bedroom, like literally next door to each other, my 4 bedroom will rent and get all the phone calls until it's rented, and then they will call on the 3 bedroom. So I think you're renting faster now that we've broken through the $2,000 rent kind of ceiling, I think it's especially valuable.
Yeah. And the unrelated occupancy limits, I mean, these are all like niche, nuanced, market specific questions. But I think there was a class I did. I think it was the class How to Achieve Financial Independence with Nothing But Grit and Tenacity. And in that class, I think I showed you charts showing you the average price for 3-bedroom properties in Fort Collins, average price for 4-bedroom properties in Fort Collins, average price for 2-bedroom and 5-bedroom. And I broke out all those different ones. And I even showed you scatter plots of the actual properties that sold. So it wasn't just an average line, but then you could look at the differential between 2 and 3 bedrooms or 3 and 4 bedrooms or 4 and 5. And you could see the gap between jumping up a bedroom on average. And it was historical data. It wasn't just like this year's data. I think I went back all the way like 1998. And so you could see on a chart very clearly where like the advantageous jump to the next bedroom was. Like, hey, I'm going to pay only $20,000 more to go from 3 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms, but my jump from 2 to 3 was $64,000. And then the other thing we like to look at, and I need to get some more to drink here because my throat's getting really itchy. The other thing to look at is how much extra rent you can get for that additional bedroom. And then you look at that ratio and you say to yourself, for $40,000 more, I can get an extra $500 a month in rent. And then by looking at those numbers, you could see almost like we do with the spreadsheet Brian does with where you buy down your interest rate for that extra little payment. What's the extra return I'm getting on that dollar amount? It's the same idea going from bedroom to bedroom and the rent increase you're getting from that bedroom for pricing. And so there's some really twisted, like math-based decision making you could add to this to help you think about whether or not it's worth going to whether it's worth going to the next one or not.
I'm reading the next question and I'm like, oh boy, class just got extended. This one's for Robert.
Still I value. Robert says, full disclosure, I haven't listened to most of your other podcasts. I plan to. I like the way you guys talk about real estate. Yeah, I like the way I talk about real estate too.
Yeah. It was did you guys ever do analysis on infinite banking?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The book's on my desk still. I didn't finish it, but we've definitely discussed it, but we have not done a deep dive. And honestly, I am probably not doing a deep dive in the next 60 days or 90 days because it's Q4 and there's too much going on.
Yeah, it's not happening in Q4. It may happen in the new year, although there was a period of time where Brian was talking to me about it. He's like, hey, have you thought about this? You know, what do you think? And he encouraged me enough to go buy 2 books and read 2 books on infinite banking. And then I watched a whole bunch of videos and stuff like that. So there was a very brief period of time. It was very compressed, like 2 weeks, where I went crazy into infinite banking and did some math and did some analysis. And I think the bloom is off the rose on my level of interest and desire to even teach a class on that as of right now. I understand enough of the math. I think there's some missing numbers that I think actually change with your contract with the specific deal you get at the time you sign up. And even that, I think, actually varies over time. I think it varies year to year or 6 months to 6 months or whatever the period of time that it does do some varying on it. And so those numbers that you get when you actually sign up and that what it is based on current market conditions and what you can get and all that other stuff, that actually is the deciding factor in some ways. Because if that's a certain number, then it looks amazing. If that's a very different number, all the extra work and effort and the costs of doing it make it go away really fast that it's not worth doing for the extra stuff you get for it. And that number matters a lot.
Yeah, I think where, and Robert just said, I'm thinking it might be beneficial if you want to hold capital for CapEx and maintenance. So maybe in your ROIQ plus R, you can do ROIQ plus R plus IBC, and we can see how that goes. Good luck. Got a week.
It's going to be ROIQ plus RI.
Yeah. So I think really where James dug in, and I didn't have time to even read the 18 emails he sent me in a row one day on IBC stuff. But really, I think where we came out from our discussions was there's probably some value if your goal is, I just don't want to go to, if you're actually trying to, because the original goal was, I don't want to be involved in the banking system. I want to be my own bank, right? It wasn't I'm going to get a better rate of return. It's just I'm removing myself from having to deal with an actual bank. I will be my own bank. So if you want to do that, then I think there's some benefit for you. I think the other huge benefit that I think James will probably at least marginally agree with is if you have kids or grandkids and you want to give them a head start, you can start paying for a policy for them, have control of the policy, use it, and then turn over control of that policy to them. And it can continue to grow. And so it's a wealth passing mechanism. And I think that is the other piece that I really looked at and went, that's probably where I think I would maybe use it.
Yeah, there are probably some additional tax benefits that you'd get from structuring it. Although I would need to actually talk to Jason and some other people about how that would actually play out. But I think that there are some tax benefits there because it is an insurance product. And I think the death benefit, if it is something you might consider regardless, having some life insurance, I think that there could be a benefit for that. I think once you get to a certain asset level, the death benefit part of passing on to your state can go away to a large degree, if not completely. Like, just as an example, if you have $10 million worth of free and clear real estate and you're trying to take care of your spouse if you die, do you really need to give them an extra $1 million?
No.
Probably not.
Yeah. And Robert also says it's not the sexiest for ROI, but it adds value. But so does putting your money in a stock market fund or something else, right? There's plenty of other ways where you can add value to that money where it's still liquid. And so I think that's part of what you'll hear next week in James's class. But it's that is where you have to step back and go, is this the best possible investment for me to do this with? Does it meet the criteria of it's fast liquidity if I need it for, reserves or something else? So
Yeah, so CC says, and I actually want to address this. CC says, I think uninterrupted compounding is the biggest selling point, especially past 5 years thereabouts, where the simple interest curve and the compound interest curve begin to differ. So they sell it as uninterrupted compounding, but it's actually a very deceptive phrase because while you are getting uninterrupted compounding, it is any money you have actually borrowed from that is being subtracted from that. So you are getting an uninterrupted compounding minus whatever the fee is that you're paying on the money that you have out. And so while you are borrowing from yourself and you are paying yourself that interest, you are also paying for the use of your money too. And so the net difference is how that is calculated. And it's really hard to see that in their marketing materials. And some of the books I read were like over the top, like the way that they phrase things, it was so super carefully phrased that if you didn't read it like really carefully and understand, yeah, they're saying it that way for a reason. It's not like they're saying it ABC, not like, oh, A through C. It's like there's a difference in why they say certain things. So it's you gotta be super careful about how you read it.
Yeah. This is a really complex topic.
Yep.
And I think much like CapEx, if you came to class tonight and you already had $60,000 properties, and then I basically said, well, a lot of those might be pigs. So you might not want to do that. If you already owned them, it's very easy to go, well, they're not because I've been making money. And so part of it is, we have a close friend who has, is basically using the IBC concept, and, he's willing to openly discuss it with us. And I think the biggest thing here to avoid having a 2-hour discussion on IBC is like really understand and go look and compare it to other things, right? And it might be super useful for you in one case, but not super useful in another case. And, it looks good on paper because it's like, just like a CapEx property, that we just talked about, looks great on paper, but if you actually go do the full analysis, maybe it's not as good as something else. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it doesn't need to be good because you feel it's safer, and that's fine, right? But I think the discussion that James and I have had is you need to go compare it to everything else, not just within itself.
Yeah, and I didn't talk to our mutual friend about the exact numbers. Right. I have like an understanding from as much as I could dig in without somebody revealing their actual contractual like rates of return and stuff like that. So I would still at some point like to do that more just so that I could properly model it when we do real estate financial planner stuff, where we could say, this is you doing infinite banking and what it looks like and stuff like that. But yeah. And I saw a question about the Warren Buffett biography. I think this is the one that you're referring to. I pretty much read all the Warren Buffett stuff that I can get my hands on. And I don't remember what the context was, but this is the main biography by Alice Schroeder. She had full cooperation from Warren on this. So did we miss some questions?
I don't think so. Just more on the infinite banking, which I think we're pausing on. Robert's like, that's why I want you guys to analyze it, because you don't have a dog in the game. I'm like, yeah. But it's also just a lot.
It is. And I think the challenge with us even teaching a class on it, it's sort of like what I talked about earlier after class, and that is doing a one pass overview of it is only like one level. It's
Right.
like going in and seeing even the difference between company A and company B and what they offer, and their particular the agreement has this one clause in it and this other one has this other clause in it, and if you have certain market conditions, that one clause may make all the difference in the world. And so that's why this is so hard, is that even with real estate, I mean, like one city to another, you invest in Fort Collins versus Loveland versus Greeley around us, and those make a difference in stuff. It makes a difference in what county you're in, makes a difference in whether you have U+2 for the city to, ordinance of like occupancy limits. All these things matter. And like, to gloss over a class on IBC when I'm really not super qualified to teach it, I've just dug in for a week intensive, reading some books and some marketing materials and digging in some videos and stuff. I don't know if I would do it justice. I could tell you like what I think, but honestly, what I think could be a generalization where the exception, if you found a certain company to do it right, it could be amazing, right? And it's like me saying real estate in general sucks because I analyzed properties in Old Town Fort Collins. I did, Mountain Avenue, $600,000 properties where you can get $2,500 a month in rent. I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't invest there either. And if you had gone outside to an outskirts, or, you got a different type of loan, or you got a different type of tenant, or you did a different type of structure, it's all that nuance and detail that makes all the difference. So I don't know.
All right, last question, then I'm out.
All right, me too.
What's the best Warren Buffett book?
Oh,
If somebody's only going to read one, which one?
probably The Snowball. That's a really good overview of Warren stuff. So the one I just posted a link to, that's probably the best overview book. Other ones do cover different things better than others. And I find it fascinating, and Brian may not, but I find it fascinating seeing the same story told from like 4 different angles, and how someone else interprets those events, and how there's like little mini changes in how the story was told, and the meaning that actually changes. I find that pretty interesting too. So I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. All right. Thanks again, Brian. I do appreciate everyone coming on and staying for the extra hour. We'll see if this goes well on the podcast. If you liked it, thumbs up. If you didn't like it, do a thumbs up so that we can know that you didn't like it as well. So we'll get a whole bunch of thumbs up on the podcast, and we'll find out how it worked out.
Nice.
All right. All right, cool. Everyone, thank you again. We'll talk to y'all soon. We're going to end the call for everybody.
Sweet.
Bye-bye
See
for
ya.
now. All right, bye-bye.